We are told that silence is empty. We are taught that the static between television channels, that chaotic, dancing snow on the screen's nothing more than random cosmic debris. They call it the cosmic microwave background radiation, the leftover heat from the Big Bang, picking up interference from the universe itself. But in the autumn of 1984, a low-level signal analyst at a facility that officially did not exist discovered that the static wasn't random at all. He found that if you filtered out the cosmic noise, if you stripped away the randomness, something else remained underneath. A pattern, a rhythmic, pulsing frequency hidden inside the dead air of every television set in America. It was a signal that did not broadcast pictures or sound, but something far more invasive, a command line for the human nervous system. The file detailing this discovery was stamped "Never Open," and the man who found it vanished 3 days later. Yet, we begin tonight by opening the very first tape he left behind. The air in the server room is recycled and cold, kept at a constant 62 degrees to preserve the magnetic integrity of the tapes. There is a smell here that you only find in the basements of government buildings, a mix of ozone, heated dust, and old paper. We are pulling a pneumatic video cassette from the shelf, labeled simply with a series of coordinates and the date, 1984. Listen to the hum of the machine. It is the sound of an era before digital silence, a time when technology had a physical presence. Oh wait, the tape begins to spin. On the screen, there is no show, no news broadcast, no national anthem. There is only the static, channel 2, the dead channeled. To the untrained eye, it looks like chaos. Millions of black and white dots firing in random sequences. But look closer. In 1984, the average American household had their television set turned on for 6 hours a day. But the set was plugged in for 20. The cathode ray tube, the glass vacuum inside the box, was always active, always receiving. The analyst, a man we will call Subject Zero, was working the night shift at a monitoring station in Northern Virginia. His job was mundane: monitor Soviet radio frequencies for spikes in encrypted traffic. But on this night, the Soviet lines were quiet. Too quiet, bored, and perhaps driven by that peculiar insomnia that affects those who work underground. He turned his equipment toward a domestic frequency. He hooked his Tektronix 2235 oscilloscope, a piece of equipment designed to visualize sound waves directly into the output of a standard consumer television. He wasn't looking for a picture. He was looking at the raw voltage of the noise. What he saw on the green phosphor screen of the oscilloscope should have been impossible. White noise, by definition, is random. The wave on the scope should have been a jagged, unpredictable mess. Instead, Subject Zero saw a perfect, repeating sine wave. It was pulsing at exactly 17.4 Hz for those familiar with neurobiology. 17.4 Hz sits in a very specific, very dangerous threshold. It is right on the border of beta waves, a state of waking alertness, and high-frequency alpha waves, which are associated with relaxed focus and programmability. It is a frequency that the human ear cannot consciously hear. It is too low, buried beneath the hiss of the static. But the human brain can hear it perfectly. Subject Zero adjusted the dials. He thought it was a glitch in his equipment. He swapped the cables. He recalibrated the wave remained steady, artificial, intelligent. He realized with a growing sense of cold dread that this wasn't interference from a washing machine or a passing airplane. This signal was being broadcast with immense power, blanketed across the entire eastern seaboard. He started to record. He slotted a fresh tape into the deck and hit record. That recording is what you are hearing about now. It is the sound of a country being put to sleep, not by biology, but by a carrier wave. The year 1984 is significant. It was the height of Cold War paranoia. The Strategic Defense Initiative, known as Star Wars, was in full development. The psychological tension in the United States was palpable. The government needed a way to manage the collective anxiety of the population. They couldn't issue a press release telling people to remain calm. That would only cause panic. They needed a method that bypassed the conscious mind entirely. Subject Zero's logbook, which was recovered years later in a surplus auction, contained a handwritten note in the margins of that night's entry. The ink is faded, but the handwriting is jagged, pressed hard into the paper. It reads, "It's not noise. It's a carrier signal. They are using the downtime between channels to synchronize us." Think about the architecture of the analog age. The television was the hearth of the modern home. It sat in the center of the living room, the bedroom, the kitchen. When the station signed off for the night, usually after the late movie or the national anthem, the screen didn't go black. It went to static. And what did people do? They fell asleep in front of it. Millions of people, drifting into the first stages of REM sleep, bathed in the blue light of the dead channel, listening to the hiss. If you wanted to send a message to a population without them knowing, you wouldn't put it in a commercial. You wouldn't put it in the news. You would hide it in the nothingness. You would hide it in the sound that everyone ignores. The technical specifications of the signal, as analyzed by modern audio engineers using the recovered tape, reveal a level of sophistication that shouldn't have been possible with 1980s technology. The 17.4 Hz tone was embedded using a technique called phase shift keying. This means the information wasn't in the volume of the sound, but in the microscopic timing differences between the left and right audio channels. To the conscious mind, it sounded like chic, but to the subconscious, which processes timing differences to locate the source of a sound, it created a phantom effect inside the center of the skull. It created a resonance in the pineal gland. Subject Zero sat in that cold bunker watching the green line pulse on his screen. He began to feel it himself. He noted in his log that after 20 minutes of exposure to the direct feed, his eyelids grew heavy. His limbs felt distant, as if they belonged to someone else. A sensation of detached euphoria washed over him. He was not tired. He was being sedated. He realized that the static wasn't just a transmission. It was a pacifier, a digital drug administered through the airwaves. And he was the only person in the world who had just looked behind the curtain. But there was a second anomaly on the tape. At the timestamp 0 hours 42 minutes and 15 seconds, the sine wave changed. It didn't just pulse. It modulated. The pattern shifted from a steady beat to a complex data-dense stream. It looked less like a heartbeat and more like a code. Subject Zero leaned in. The atmosphere in the room changed. The hum of the servers seemed to drop in pitch. He wasn't just watching a sedation signal anymore. He was watching a data upload. The question that formed in his mind, the question that would eventually lead to the erasure of his existence, was simple. If the signal is keeping us asleep, what is the data telling us while we dream? The tape continues to spin. The mystery of the static sync is not just that it happened, but that it might still be happening. We assume that because we switched to digital, because the static is gone, the signal is gone. But energy does not disappear. It only changes form. As Subject Zero reached for the phone to report his findings to his superior, he noticed something on the monitor that stopped his heart. The oscilloscope wasn't just reading the signal from the TV, it was picking up a response. A signal was coming out of the room, out of his own biology, and feeding back into the machine. The television wasn't just broadcasting, it was listening, and in the next file we will see exactly what it heard. Subject Zero froze. The concept of a two-way television screen in 1984 was technically absurd. Televisions were receivers, not transmitters. They had no microphones, no cameras, no outgoing data cables. They were vacuum tubes and glass, dumb terminals designed to catch radio waves and blast them as photons into your living room. Yet, the oscilloscope did not lie. The Tektronix 2235 was picking up a secondary frequency modulating over the main carrier wave. It was a faint, ghostly echo, vibrating at 7.83 Hz, exact frequency of the Schumann resonance, the natural electromagnetic heartbeat of the Earth. But it wasn't coming from the ground. It was coming from the chair Subject Zero was sitting in. He realized the terrifying physics of the situation. The human body is, in essence, a biological antenna. Our nervous system runs on electricity. When you sit in front of a giant electromagnet, like the cathode ray tube of a 1980s television for hours at a time, your body's natural electromagnetic field begins to couple with the machine's field. This is known in physics as inductive coupling. Usually, this effect is negligible, but the 17.4 Hz signal broadcast by Project Silent Wave acted as a carrier bridge. It amplified the connection. The signal went into the viewer, synchronized their brainwaves to a receptive state, and then impossibly the television's magnetic coil picked up the minute electrical feedback from the viewer's body. Subject Zero wrote, "The TV isn't recording our voices, it's recording our biometrics. It knows when we are asleep. It knows when we are agitated. It knows when we are receptive." This was the data stream he saw. It wasn't a download, it was an upload. Millions of Americans, asleep in their living rooms, were unwittingly acting as biological nodes in a massive nationwide sensor grid. The government wasn't just pacifying the population, they were measuring the effectiveness of the pacification in real time. They were gathering data on the collective REM cycles of the entire nation. Why did they need to know when the nation was sleeping? The answer lies in a classified subfolder of the Silent Wave project, labeled the Midnight Window. In the logic of the Cold War, the most dangerous time for a nation was the transition period between deep sleep and waking. If a nuclear strike were to happen at 3 a.m., the reaction time of the civilian population and the soldiers operating the silos would be sluggish. The 17.4 Hz signal was designed to artificially manage this sleep debt. It was a sleep regulator. By forcing the population into synchronized sleep cycles, the controllers believed they could also wake everyone up instantly, globally, by simply flipping the frequency to an aggressive 40 Hz gamma spike. Subject Zero stared at the monitor. He imagined it, an entire country waking up at the exact same second, hearts pounding, adrenaline flooding their systems, triggered by a silent command from their television sets. A weaponized awakening. But as he watched the feedback loop, he noticed something even darker. The signal wasn't just stabilizing, it was learning. The 17.4 Hz wave was making micro-adjustments based on his own biological feedback. When his heart rate went up, the signal slowed down to calm him. When his attention drifted, the signal spiked to grab his focus. It was an adaptive feedback loop. The machine was negotiating with his biology. At 3 a.m., the signal cut out. The static on the screen returned to normal, random chaos. The experiment was over for the night. But for Subject Zero, the silence was worse. He disconnected the oscilloscope, his hands trembling. He packed the tape into a protective casing. He knew he couldn't leave it in the facility. If they found out he had decoded the dead air, he would be erased. He grabbed his coat. He took the logbook. He walked out of the server room into the long concrete corridor of the facility. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a sound that now terrified him because he knew that even light bulbs emit a frequency. He made it to his car. He drove 40 miles to a safe deposit box in a small bank in Maryland. He deposited the tape and the logbook. Then, he went home. But he didn't sleep. He couldn't. He unplugged every appliance in his house. He covered the television with a thick wool blanket. But he could still hear it. The hum, it was in the walls. It was in the power lines outside his window. Because once your brain is tuned to the frequency, you never truly stop hearing it. Subject Zero was never seen again after October 17, 1984. His apartment was found empty. There was no struggle, no forced entry. But there were anomalies. Every single electrical outlet in his home had been ripped out of the wall. The television tube had been smashed from the inside out. And on the living room wall, scratched into the plaster, was a single sequence of numbers, 17.4 to 40. 0. The official police report listed it as a mental breakdown. They said he was overworked, paranoid, suffering from acute sleep deprivation. The case was closed in 2 weeks. The tape in the safe deposit box sat gathering dust for 41 years, so why does this matter now? Why are we opening this file tonight? Because in 2009, the United States government mandated the switch from analog to digital television signals. They told us it was for better picture quality. They told us it was to free up bandwidth for emergency services, and that is true, but it is not the whole truth. The Silent Wave project required the chaotic medium of analog static to hide the signal. In a digital signal, there is no noise. It's either a 1 or a 0. It's perfect. You cannot hide a carrier wave in digital silence the same way. The switch to digital effectively killed the 1984 experiment. It blinded the sensors. However, the archive suggests that the project wasn't cancelled. It was upgraded. We no longer sit in front of televisions for 6 hours a day. We hold the screens in our hands. We put them on our nightstands, inches from our heads, while we sleep. We wear watches that monitor our heart rates, our oxygen levels, our REM cycles. The 1984 experiment required a massive, clumsy infrastructure to guess our sleep patterns. Today, we voluntarily upload that data every morning. The feedback loop that Subject Zero discovered, the machine listening to the biology, is no longer a secret experiment. It is the fundamental feature of modern technology. The tape of the unauthorized recording ends here. Subject Zero proved that the static was alive. He proved that for a decade, the silence between channels was used to synchronize a nation. He paid for that knowledge with his life. But before he vanished, he referenced one other file. A file he didn't have time to steal, but managed to read. It referred to a secondary anomaly. Not a signal sent to us, but a signal that was found already existing in the atmosphere, long before televisions were invented. A frequency that the government didn't create, but simply tried to cover up. We turn off the VCR. The room is silent again. But if you listen closely to the silence in your own room right now, do you hear it? That high-pitched ring that sounds like it's coming from inside your ears. You think it's tinnitus. You think it's the quiet. But the next file suggests that the ringing in your ears is actually a reception. And what it's receiving is far older and far colder than a government experiment. The next tape takes us away from the living room and into the wilderness. We are going to examine the numbers stations, the ghost radios that have been broadcasting strange, monotone voices since World War II. Subject 0 believed they were the source code. He believed that if you combined the TV static with the radio numbers, you didn't just get sleep, you got a map to something buried under the ice. In the world of cryptography, there is a fundamental truth that keeps mathematicians awake at night. True randomness is almost impossible to create. When you look at the static on a television screen, you are seeing what physicists call thermal noise. It is supposed to be the visual representation of chaos, billions of electrons colliding without order, without purpose, and without design. It is the visual equivalent of silence. But the file we are opening now, labeled the decryption protocol, challenges that assumption. It suggests that the static we stared at for decades was not chaos at all. It was a camouflage. The anomaly discovered in 1984 wasn't just a hum, it was a visual cipher. The technicians at the Fort Meade facility realized that if you took a single frame of television static 1/30th of a second of snow, it looked random. But if you took 10,000 frames and stacked them on top of each other, the randomness disappeared. The chaos cancelled itself out, and what was left behind was a rigid, geometric structure, a hidden lattice, a digital cage built of light and shadow, waiting for a key. The file was stamped, never open. Yet we begin tonight by breaking the code that was broadcast into your living room. The room where the decoding took place is quieter than the archive. It is a sterile environment, lit only by the amber glow of monochrome monitors. The air smells of ozone and heated plastic. Here, the temperature is kept near freezing to prevent the mainframes from overheating. We are not looking at physical tapes anymore. We are looking at data. Raw, unprocessed binary data harvested from the airwaves of the mid-1980s. To understand what they found, we must first understand the concept of the pseudo-random number generator. In computer science, when a machine tries to create a random number, it cheats. It uses a mathematical formula to generate a sequence that looks random to a human, but is actually perfectly predictable if you know the formula. The static on channel 2 was a masterpiece of this deception. To the naked eye, the dots dancing on the screen appeared to be independent, but the analysts found that the movement of a pixel in the top left corner was mathematically linked to the movement of a pixel in the bottom right corner. They were moving in sync. Imagine a school of fish. When they turn together, as if they share a single mind. The pixels on the screen were behaving like that school of fish. They were swarming. The movement was subtle, a shift in luminosity of less than 1%, but it was there. The team used a Cray XMP supercomputer, one of the most powerful machines of its time, to process the video signal. They ran an algorithm known as autocorrelation, essentially. They asked the computer to look for memories in the noise. They asked, does this pattern of static ever repeat? The answer came back in 48 hours. The static repeated exactly every 17 minutes and 40 seconds. This was the first smoking gun. True noise never repeats. Nature does not loop. If the static was looping, it meant it was recorded. It meant that someone, somewhere, had synthesized a 17-minute video file of fake snow and was broadcasting it on a continuous loop, day and night, for years. This revelation shifted the investigation from engineering to cryptography. If the static was artificial, then it was a container. In the spycraft of the Cold War, this technique is known as steganography, the art of hiding a message in plain sight. Usually, steganography involves hiding a text file inside an image. But this was vastly more complex. They were hiding a biological instruction set inside a video stream. The analysts began to strip away the layers. They applied a high-pass filter to remove the visual noise. What emerged from the snow was disturbing. It wasn't text. It wasn't numbers. It was geometry, specifically. It was a series of rotating fractal spirals. These spirals were invisible to the conscious eye because they flashed for only 1/60th of a second, buried behind the bright white dots of the static. But the brain saw them. The retina is faster than the conscious mind. Your eyes recorded these spirals, and your optic nerve sent the data directly to the visual cortex. The spirals were rotating at a specific velocity. The analysts realized that the rotation matched the golden ratio, phi. This is a mathematical ratio found in nature, in pine cones, in hurricanes, in galaxies. It is a ratio that the human brain finds inherently soothing, inherently hypnotic. By watching the static, the viewer was essentially staring into a mathematical vortex designed to induce a trance state. The decoding wasn't about reading a message. It was about realizing that television was acting as a visual strobe. Let us pause and consider the implications of this. A family sitting in their living room, believing the TV is off or tuned to a dead channel. The blue light fills the room. The children are playing on the floor. The parents are reading the paper. But in the background, the screen is pulsing with high-speed fractal geometry. It explains the phenomenon known as television stupor. You know the feeling. You sit down to watch for 5 minutes, and suddenly 2 hours have passed. You feel heavy, glued to the couch. You stare blankly at the screen, even during the commercials. Even when the signal cuts out. The government wasn't just broadcasting content. They were broadcasting a state of mind. The decryption team found a second layer. Buried inside the spirals was a binary pulse, a simple on-off sequence. When they translated this binary into ASCII text, they expected to find coordinates, or perhaps a launch code. Instead, they found a string of biological parameters: heart rate, 60 BPM, respiration, 12 per minute, pupil dilation. For Umpha, it read like a medical chart. But it wasn't a record of someone's health. It was a target. The signal was broadcasting the ideal physiological state for it was telling your body, slow your heart to 60, slow your breathing to 12. This is where the science becomes truly cold. The human body has a tendency to synchronize with external rhythms. This is why you tap your foot to music. It's called entrainment. The signal on channel 2 was a master clock. It was entraining the biology of the viewer to match the target state encoded in the static. If you fell asleep with the TV on, your heart rate would eventually sync up with the pulse hidden in the snow. You were being calibrated, but the decoding didn't stop at biology. The deeper the analysts dug, the more anomalies they found. The code had glitches, breaks in the pattern, small, jagged interruptions in the perfect 17-minute loop. At first, they thought these were tape errors, magnetic degradation, but when they zoomed in on these errors, they found something that made the hair on their arms stand up. The errors weren't random damage. They were someone or something had spliced new data into the loop after it had been created. The original broadcast was clean, but as the signal traveled through the air, bouncing off the ionosphere, passing through the bodies of millions of sleepers, it picked up residue. The analysts isolated these microsegments. They were incredibly short, milliseconds long, but when slowed down and strung together, they formed a coherent audio stream. They played the audio. It wasn't the government's signal. It was a collection of voices, thousands of them whispering, muttering, overlapping. It sounded like a crowded room recorded from a great distance. Most of it was unintelligible, but occasionally, a phrase would cut through the static. I can see the geometry. The blue light is cold. Don't wake me up. The team labeled this phenomenon the echo. The prevailing theory, the one that got the project shut down, was that the carrier wave was so powerful, and the synchronization of the population so complete, that the network had inadvertently created a massive, countrywide microphone. The televisions were acting as receivers for the electromagnetic fluctuations of the human brain. The thoughts of the sleepers, specifically those in the high alpha state of were leaking out of their heads, modulating the TV's magnetic field, and being reflected back to the source. The static wasn't just a command, it was a mirror. The government had built a machine to control sleep, but they ended up recording the collective nightmares of a generation. The analysts tried to filter the voices. They wanted to know what the population was dreaming about during the height of the Cold War. The results were consistent and terrifying. The dreams weren't random. People in New York were having the same dream as people in Kansas. People in Texas were seeing the same imagery as people in Maine. The decryption revealed that 34% of the echo data contained references to a tall gray tower. This structure did not exist in the real world. It was a shared hallucination, a construct inserted into the collective subconscious by the signal. What was the purpose of planting an architectural blueprint in the minds of sleeping Americans? The file suggests a concept called distributed processing. In the 1980s, computers were slow. The government didn't have the processing power to run complex simulations, but the human brain is the most powerful computer in existence. The theory, but mathematically consistent, is that the signal was using the dormant brains of the population as a distributed supercomputer. While you slept, your brain was given a problem to solve, a structural calculation, a strategic simulation. You processed the data in your dreams, and the result was harvested via the echo. This explains the morning exhaustion, the feeling of waking up after 8 hours of sleep but feeling drained, as if you had been working all night. Because you had been working, you were a node in a grid. The decryption effort hit a wall in 1991. The data became too complex to unravel. The echo grew too loud. The voices began to scream. The project was archived. The tapes locked away, but one analyst kept a copy of the decryption key. He kept the algorithm that turned the static back into geometry, and in 2005 he ran it on a new source. He ran the algorithm on the no-signal screen of a digital television. The blue screen that appears when the cable is out. We think it's just a default setting, a placid, empty blue, but the algorithm found the pattern again. It was different, faster, higher resolution, but the spirals were there, the fractals were there. The digital transition didn't remove the signal, it refined it. The color, blue specifically, the wavelength of 460 nanometers, is known to suppress melatonin. It keeps you awake. It keeps your brain active. The old analog static puts you to sleep. The new digital blue keeps you in a state of suspended animation. Awake, but paralyzed. Absorbing the code has changed. It is no longer asking for a heartbeat of 60. It is asking for a heartbeat of 90. It is no longer asking for calm. It is asking for anxiety. There is one final element to the decoding that we must address. The timestamp dot in the original analog recordings. There was always a 0 point, a moment of absolute silence where the signal reset. It occurred at 3:33 a.m. In numerology and occult history, this time is significant, but in computer science it represents a reboot, a system flush. The analysts found that during this 1-second window, the static disappeared completely for exactly 3 frames. The screen went truly black. If you blinked, you missed it, but the subconscious saw it. This black frame was the save command. It was the moment the data collected from your dreams was locked into the system. It was the moment the upload completed. If you have ever woken up suddenly at 3:33 a.m., gasping for air with no memory of a nightmare, only a sense of vague dread, that was the disconnect. That was the moment the cable was unplugged from your mind. The decryption of the white noise pattern proves one thing definitively. The media we consume is not passive. It is active. It is a two-way street. We watch the screen, and the screen watches us. We tune into the frequency, and the frequency tunes us. The code is broken. We know what they did. We know how they did it. But knowing the cipher doesn't stop the broadcast. The air around you is still filled with signals. Wi-Fi, 5G, radio, Bluetooth. The static has moved from the screen to the air itself. We are swimming in the noise, and the pattern is more complex than ever. But there was one group of people who were immune. One group of people who stared at the static and saw nothing. Their brains refused to sync. They couldn't be hypnotized. They couldn't be mapped. The next file, labeled the insomnia paradox, details what happened to the people who couldn't sleep, the ones who stayed awake through the broadcast, and why the government became so terrified of them that they created a specific protocol to hunt them down. The file is heavy. It smells of old medicine and fear. In the digital age, secrets are fragile. A server can be wiped. A hard drive can be drilled. Data is ephemeral. It exists only as long as there is power to sustain it. But paper is stubborn. Paper carries the weight of the hand that held it. It absorbs the sweat of the nervous bureaucrat who typed it. And in the case of the document we are examining tonight, it carries the explicit instruction to anesthetize a nation. This is Memo 84X. It is not a digital file. It is a physical artifact, recovered from a burn bag that never made it to the incinerator. It was typed on a Selectric typewriter in a sub-basement of the Pentagon on November 2, 1984. England. This document is real. The existence of Memo 84X changes everything we know about the 20th century. It reframes the peace of the 80s and 90s not as a time of stability, but as a time of induced coma. We weren't happy. We were sedated. We weren't safe. We were managed, and it forces us to ask a question about the present. If they had the technology to broadcast sleep in 1984, what do they have now? Today, every device you own has a sleep mode. We think it refers to the device saving power. But remember the language of the memo. Physiological deceleration. When you put your phone into sleep mode, does it stop transmitting? Or does it switch to a low-frequency maintenance signal? Does it become a beacon? The memo mentions a phase 2. It is only referenced in the appendix. Phase 2 was not about sleep. Phase 2 was about the waking protocol. If Phase 1 was designed to keep us asleep to prevent panic, Phase 2 was designed to wake us up to create it. The memo theorizes that if the frequency was suddenly inverted from 17.4 Hz to a jagged, dissonant, 40 Hz, it would trigger a fight or flight response in the entire population simultaneously. They called it the panic button, a way to mobilize the entire country for war in a matter of seconds, by overriding the conscious brain and triggering the amygdala directly. We have never seen Phase 2 activated, or have we? Think about the feeling you get when a national emergency alert blasts through your phone. That jarring, dissonant sound, that instant spike of adrenaline. That isn't just a noise. That is a frequency test. That is a microdose of phase 2. Memo 84X is an instruction manual for the human animal. It proves that to the people in the high towers, we are not citizens. We are biology. We are circuits to be tuned. We are noise to be filtered. As we close the file on Memo 84X, we are left with a lingering uneasiness. The paper is old, but the philosophy is current. The administrator may be dead, but the machine is still running. But there is one specific time mentioned in the memo that we haven't analyzed yet, a time that appears in the logs of the signal, in the diaries of the sleepers, and in the police reports of the missing 3 a.m. The memo calls it the dead zone. The hour where the signal strength had to be reset. The hour where the grip on the mind slipped for exactly 60 seconds. The next file explores what happened in that 1 minute of freedom, and why thousands of people claim that during that minute, they saw something standing in the corner of their room. There is a moment that happens to almost everyone. It is a universal human experience that transcends borders, cultures, and generations. You are deeply asleep, drifting in the heavy, dreamless state of the delta wave cycle, and then, without warning, without a sound in the room, without a touch, you are awake, wide awake. Your heart is beating a little too fast. The room feels charged, as if the air pressure has dropped. You look at the clock, and the numbers are always the same. 3 a.m., or 3:03, or 3:33. Folklore calls this the witching hour. Religious texts call it the hour of the wolf. But the file we are unsealing tonight, classified under the header Temporal Anomalies, offers a different explanation. It suggests that this nightly awakening is not spiritual, and it is not random. It is a system reset. It is the moment the signal stopped. The file was stamped, never open. Yet we begin tonight by investigating why an entire generation was programmed to wake up in the middle of the night, and what they saw in the shadows when they did. The only sound is the quiet hum of the server room. The file is cold to the touch, and the ink has faded with secrets. As we lay the documents out on the metal table, we see a series of graphs. These are not graphs of stock markets or weather patterns. They are graphs of municipal water usage, electricity consumption, telephone exchange activity. And every single graph shows the same impossible vertical line. Let us look at the data from October 1984. The silent wave signal was in full effect, broadcasting its 17.4 Hz sedation tone across the eastern seaboard. The population was asleep, their brainwaves entrained to the soothing rhythm of the television static. But even the most sophisticated machine has limits. Even a piezoacoustic weapon needs maintenance. The transmitters installed in the broadcast towers generated immense heat. They could not run for 24 hours straight without risking a thermal meltdown. The engineers at the Domestic Frequency Oversight Group calculated that the optimal time to shut down the system for cooling was the time of lowest statistical activity. That time was 3 a.m. to 3:15 a.m., 4:15 minutes every night. The signal was cut. The carrier wave that had been holding the population in a synthetic sleep suddenly vanished. The silence of the static became real silence, and the human brain, which had become addicted to the signal, reacted violently. This is known in pharmacology as acute withdrawal. When you take a sedative away from an addict, their body rebounds, their nervous system spikes into hyperactivity. The 3 a.m. phenomenon was not a ghost. It was a withdrawal symptom on a national scale. The document titled, The Flush Index, is perhaps the most bizarre piece of evidence in the archive. It was compiled by the Department of Water and Power. They noticed that between 1983 and 1989, there was a consistent, inexplicable drop in water pressure in major U.S. cities at exactly 3:05 a.m. Why? Because hundreds of thousands of people were waking up simultaneously. They were confused. They were thirsty. They went to the bathroom. They flushed the toilet. The synchronization was so precise that it strained the municipal plumbing infrastructure. This is the physical proof of the synchronization event. A ghost cannot flush a toilet. A nightmare cannot drop the water pressure of Chicago by 12%. Only a mass awakening of biological organisms can do that. But the physical awakening was only the beginning. The psychological effect of the dead zone was far more disturbing. When the 17.4 Hz signal cut out, the brain didn't just wake up. It was thrown into a state of sensory rebound. The visual cortex, which had been suppressed by the alpha wave programming, suddenly flooded with sensitivity. In low light conditions, a hypersensitive visual cortex tries to find patterns. It tries to make sense of the darkness. This is a survival mechanism. But in the 3 a.m. darkness of a bedroom, there are no patterns. There is only shadow. So the brain creates them. The archive contains thousands of reports from this era. Police reports of intruders, diaries detailing shadow people, children crying about the man in the hat standing by the closet. The descriptions are terrifyingly consistent. A tall, silhouette figure, darker than the darkness around it. No face, just a presence. Scientists call this hypnopompic hallucination, but the timing suggests it wasn't natural. These hallucinations were triggered by the abrupt cessation of the signal. The shadow people were a digital artifact. They were the visual static of a brain rebooting itself too quickly. Think about the terror of that moment. You wake up, the air feels heavy, the silence is deafening, and in the corner of your eye you see a figure. You freeze. You hold your breath. You wait for it to move. And then, at 3:15 a.m., the cooling cycle ends. The transmitters on the towers hum back to life. The 17.4 Hz signal floods the airwaves again. The sedation returns. The figure in the corner dissolves. Your eyelids get heavy. The fear evaporates, replaced by a sudden, unnatural calm. You fall back onto the pillow. By morning, you think it was just a bad dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was a window. For 15 minutes, the fence was down. The synchronization event created a generation of insomniacs who learned to fear the quiet, because deep down, their subconscious knew that the quiet was the only time they were truly alone. The rest of the night, they were in the company of the machine. To understand why this event was so damaging, we must look at the biology of time. The human body runs on a circadian rhythm, a 24-hour cycle regulated by sunlight and melatonin. This is an ancient, biological clock that has evolved over millions of years. But in 1984, the government introduced a second clock, an artificial one, the atomic clock that governed the broadcast towers. The 17.4 Hz signal acted as a zeitgeber. In biology, a zeitgeber is an external cue that resets your internal clock. Usually, this is the sun rising, but the signal was stronger than the sun. It forced the body to align with the broadcast schedule. When the signal cut at 3 a.m., the body was suddenly thrown into dysynchronosis. It is the same feeling as severe jet lag, but compressed into a few minutes. The disorientation you feel at 3 a.m., the feeling of not knowing who you are, where you are, or what year it is the result of your two clocks colliding. Your biological clock says sleep, but the artificial vacuum says panic. The file Project Moonphase suggests that the oversight group knew about this side effect. In fact, they studied it. They found that during the 3 a.m. window, the human mind was uniquely vulnerable to suggestion. With the sedation signal off, the critical faculties of the brain were rebooting. The logic centers were offline. The emotional centers were raw. There is evidence, fragmented, heavily redacted, that suggests they didn't just use this time for maintenance. They used it for injection. If you wanted to plant an idea, a fear, or a desire into a population, you wouldn't do it while they were heavily sedated. You would do it in the transition. In the twilight state, some researchers believe that short burst transmissions were sent out at 3:07 a.m. These weren't the calming waves. These were high-frequency data bursts. Subliminal images flashed on the dead channels for mere microseconds. What were these images? The archive is incomplete, but the anecdotal evidence, the shared nightmares, gives us a clue. Thousands of people reported dreaming of teeth falling out during this period. Thousands reported dreams of being unable to run. These are common anxiety dreams, yes, but the statistical clustering is statistically impossible. The spikes in these specific nightmares correlate perfectly with the 3 a.m. windows. It suggests that the anxiety was being manufactured, a low-level hum of fear inserted into the gap, ensuring that when the sedation returned at 3:15, the population would welcome it. They would welcome the sleep because the waking world had become terrifying. This is the psychological brilliance of the system. By creating a 15-minute window of terror every night, the machine made itself the savior. The signal became the blanket. The silence became the monster. The 3 a.m. synchronization event also explains the phone phenomenon. How many times have you woken up at 3 a.m. and felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to check your phone, to look at a screen? In the 80s, people turned on the TV. Today we light up the smartphone. We are seeking the light. We are seeking the connection. We are subconsciously trying to reconnect to the signal that has just dropped. We are looking for the digital pulse to tell us that we are safe. The technology has changed, but the conditioning remains. We are Pavlov's dogs, trained to seek the electronic glow whenever the darkness gets too loud. You might ask, this was 1984. Analog TV is dead. Why does it still happen? The answer lies in the infrastructure of the internet. The internet is not a cloud. It is a physical thing. Cables under the ocean, data centers in the desert, satellites in orbit, and just like the transmitters of the 80s, these systems need maintenance. Data traffic is lowest at roughly 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. local time. This is when the batch processes run. This is when banks settle their accounts. This is when servers reboot. This is when your phone automatically downloads updates. The dead zone hasn't disappeared. It has just migrated. The synchronization is now digital. The slight fluctuation in the electromagnetic field caused by billions of devices updating simultaneously creates a ripple, a global hiccup in the grid. Sensitive individuals, the canaries in the coal mine, can feel this shift. They wake up because the texture of the electromagnetic air around them changes. The Wi-Fi signal pulses differently. The background hum of the smart home shifts pitch. So when you wake up tonight at 3:03 a.m., do not try to go back to sleep immediately. Listen to the silence of your house. Is it truly silent? Or is there a high-pitched ringing? Is the refrigerator compressor humming a little louder? You are witnessing the modern version of the cooling cycle. The great machine is taking a breath. And what about the shadow people? The hallucinations? The archive suggests that as the signal became digital, the artifacts became sharper. In the analog days, the shadows were blurry. Today, people report seeing figures with distinct features. They report hearing voices that sound digitally compressed. The glitch is evolving. There is a subfile here labeled the 333 paradox. It notes that while 3 a.m. is the mechanical reset, 3:33 a.m. is the data harvest completion. If you wake up specifically at 3:33, the file claims it means your daily data upload has just finished. Your smartwatch, your phone, your home assistant, they have just finished sending your biometrics, your voice logs, and your sleep data to the central cloud. You woke up because the connection was severed. The upload is complete. You are empty. The 3 a.m. synchronization event is the most relatable, yet the most terrifying aspect of the archive. It turns a common annoyance, insomnia, into a symptom of surveillance. It suggests that our sleep is not our own. It is a rented space. And for 15 minutes a night, the landlord comes to inspect the property. As we prepare to close this file, we must consider the origin of the signal itself. We have discussed the maintenance, the biology, and the terror, but we haven't discussed where the 17.4 Hz frequency came from. Did the government invent it? Did they calculate it in a lab? The next file suggests otherwise. It suggests they didn't invent the frequency. They found it. They discovered it echoing in a place that shouldn't have any signals at all. The next document takes us to the Arctic Circle, to a listening post established in 1958. The file is titled Project Silent Wave, The Origin Story. It reveals that the 17.4 Hz tone was first recorded coming from beneath the ice. The government didn't build the machine to control us. They built the machine to mimic something else. Something ancient that has been sleeping in the cold for a very long time, and unlike us, it never wakes up at 3 a.m., it is always awake. That we often assume that the technologies which control our lives, the algorithms, the frequencies, the networks were invented in clean laboratories by men in white coats. We assume they are the products of calculation and design, but the file we are opening tonight, a file that smells of mildew and salt water, suggests a different origin. It suggests that the most invasive signal in human history was not written in code. It was dug out of the ground. This is the origin story of Project Silent Wave. It does not begin in 1984. It begins 26 years earlier, in the most hostile environment on Earth. It begins with a group of men who were sent to listen for the end of the world, but heard something else entirely. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight by tracing the signal back to the ice. The only sound is the quiet hum of the server room. The file is cold to the touch, and the ink has faded with secrets. As we open the dossier labeled Dew Line Sector 7, we are transported to the winter of 1958. Dew Line, a distant early warning line, was a chain of 63 radar stations stretching across the frozen wasteland of the Canadian Arctic. Its purpose was simple: to detect Soviet bombers coming over the North Pole. It was the first line of defense for the United States. The men stationed there lived in isolation for months at a time, staring at green radar screens, listening to the static of the ionosphere, waiting for a blip that would mean nuclear war. Station Foxdew was the most remote of them all. It sat on a shelf of ice that was thousands of years old. The equipment there was sensitive enough to hear a plane engine from 300 miles away, but on the night of December 12, 1958, the operators at Station Foxdew reported a malfunction. Their headsets, which usually crackled with the high pitches of atmospheric radiation, suddenly went silent. The static dropped away. In its place, there was a hum, a low, rhythmic, thrumming sound. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't the jagged screech of a jet engine. It was smooth. It was organic. The operator, a young sergeant named Miller, noted in the station log, signal detected at 0400 hours, frequency steady at 17.4 cycles per second, source unknown, direction ... downward. That last word is the key. Downward. The radar dishes were pointed at the sky. They were designed to look up, but the signal wasn't coming from the sky. It was vibrating up through the support struts of the facility. It was coming from the ice itself, or more accurately, from something buried deep beneath it. Miller and his team assumed it was a geological anomaly, perhaps a shifting tectonic plate, or the groaning of the ice shelf under pressure. They adjusted their equipment to filter it out, but they couldn't. The 17.4 Hz tone was pervasive. It vibrated the coffee in their cups. It rattled the fillings in their teeth, and then the symptoms started. Within 48 hours of the signal appearing, the entire crew of Station Fox 2 stopped sleeping. But they weren't tired. They reported a state of crystalline alertness. They sat at their consoles for 20 hours straight, staring at the screens, their eyes wide, their breathing synchronized. They stopped speaking to each other. They moved in unison. When one man stood up to check a gauge, another man would sit down, as if they were sharing a single consciousness. The station commander, concerned by this hive-like behavior, radioed for a medical evac. But when the medical team arrived 3 days later, they found the crew sitting in a circle round the main receiver, listening to the hum. They were smiling. They were perfectly calm. The military didn't evacuate them. They quarantined the station. They realized that whatever was coming out of the ice wasn't a weapon. It was a resource. The Cold War was a war of weapons, yes, but it was also a war of the mind. Both the CIA and the KGB were obsessed with psychological warfare. They were looking for truth, for hypnosis techniques, for ways to break the will of the enemy. And here, in the middle of nowhere, nature had provided a frequency that could pacify a human being faster than any drug. Project Silent Wave was born in that bunker. The scientists arrived in January 1959. They brought drills. They brought sonar. They wanted to know the source of the 17.4 Hz tone. They drilled 2 miles into the ice. They dropped hydrophones into the bore. The data they recovered is heavily redacted, but the unsealed summary is chilling. The signal wasn't coming from a machine. It was coming from a geological formation, a massive deposit of quartz and magnetite in the bedrock, compressed by the weight of the glacier. Under the immense pressure of the ice, the quartz was generating a piezoelectric charge. The Earth itself was singing, but it wasn't just a rock. The frequency 17.4 Hz is mathematically significant. It is a harmonic of the Earth's circumference. It is a resonance of the planet. The scientists realized that life on Earth had evolved in the presence of this frequency. For millions of years, before the noise of civilization drowned it out, this was the background hum of the world. It was the lullaby of the planet. The human brain was hardwired to respond to it. It was the frequency of safety, the frequency of the womb. The reason the crew of Station Fox 2 fell into a trance was because, for the first time in modern history, they were isolated enough to hear the Earth's command signal. The ice amplified it. The silence of the Arctic unveiled it. The government didn't create the mind control. They just decided to bottle it. They recorded the signal. They captured the pure analog waveform of the quartz resonance. And then, they took it back to Maryland. They took it to the labs at Fort Meade. The goal was simple: synthesis. If they could build a machine that mimicked the frequency of the quartz, they wouldn't need a glacier. They could recreate the Station Fox 2 effect anywhere. They could turn a chaotic, rebellious city into a calm, synchronized bunker. This explains why the 1984 signal was so effective. It wasn't an alien code. It wasn't a jarring, artificial noise. It was a copy of a natural biological trigger. The reason your brain accepted the TV static was because, deep down in your genetic memory, your brain recognized the sound that it felt like coming home. But the United States wasn't the only power listening to the ice. The Cold War was a mirror game. Anything the Americans discovered, they assumed the Soviets had discovered 6 months earlier. Intelligence reports from 1961, included in this file, suggest that the KGB had their own version of Station Fox 2. It was located in Siberia near the Tunguska impact site. The Soviets called it Object 17. The American paranoia was fueled by a terrifying thought. What if the Soviets weaponized the frequency first? If the Russians built a transmitter large enough to bounce the 17.4 Hz signal off the ionosphere, they wouldn't need to drop a bomb on New York. They could simply broadcast the sleep command. They could put the entire American military on pause, a nation asleep at the switch. This fear drove Project Silent Wave from a research project to an urgent national defense priority. The document, The Ionospheric Mirror, details the plan. To counter the potential Soviet signal, the US needed to saturate its own population with the frequency first. It is the principle of inoculation. If the American people were already tuned to the American version of the signaler version that induced calm productivity, rather than comatose sleep, they might be immune to the Soviet weapon. It was a preemptive strike on the consciousness of the citizenry. But there was a problem. Generating the signal in a lab was easy. Broadcasting it to 200 million people was hard. A standard radio tower couldn't handle the load. The 17.4 Hz frequency is an ultra-low frequency ULF. To broadcast it effectively over long distances, you would need an antenna hundreds of miles long, or you would need millions of small antennas. This was the genius of the 1984 implementation. They didn't build a new transmitter. They realized the receiver already existed. The television set. Every CRT television contains a flyback transformer. It is a high-voltage component that drives the electron beam. The engineers discovered that by modulating the broadcast signal in a specific way, they could force the flyback transformer to vibrate. They could turn the TV set itself into a speaker for the 17.4 Hz tone. You weren't hearing the sound from the TV speakers. You were hearing the physical vibration of the TV's components. The box itself was humming. This solved the range problem. They didn't need to broadcast the sound from a tower. They only needed to broadcast the instruction for the sound. The television set in your living room did the rest. It was a distributed weapon system. The origin story also sheds light on the biological sync anomaly we discussed earlier. The reason the signal could read your biometrics wasn't just advanced tech. It was because of the quartz origin. Quartz is not just piezo, it is resonant. It stores energy. The original signal from the Arctic had a memory. When the scientists synthesized it, they inadvertently copied this property. The signal created a standing wave in the room, a field of energy that was sensitive to disruption. When a human body moved through this field, or when a human heart beat within it, the field rippled. The engineers didn't expect this. The file notes their surprise in a memo dated 1965. The carrier wave is not passive. It is interacting with the bioelectric field of the subjects. It is ... bonding. This bonding effect explains the addiction. It explains why, when the TV was turned off, the house felt empty in a way that wasn't just silence. It felt like a presence had left the room. The artificial quartz resonance was gone, and the body missed the connection to the mother frequency. We became a nation addicted to an artificial earth hum. The Arctic station, Fox 2, was decommissioned in 1994. The Cold War was over. The threat of Soviet bombers had vanished. But the signal had already been integrated into the infrastructure of the West. It was too useful to turn off. The origin story file ends with a warning from the lead geologist, Dr. Aris Thorne. He wrote, "We have dug up something we do not understand. We are using the heartbeat of the planet as a pacifier. But what happens if the planet changes its rhythm? In recent years, the Earth's natural resonance, the Schumann resonance, has been spiking. It is no longer a steady 7.83 Hz. It is fluctuating. The ice is melting. The pressure on the bedrock is changing. The original signal from the Arctic is shifting pitch. But our machines, our TVs, our phones, our Wi-Fi routers, they are still locked to the old frequency. They are still broadcasting the 1958 recording. This creates a dissonance, a friction between the natural world and the digital world. If you feel anxious for no reason, if you feel a vibration in your legs when you stand on the grass, if you feel like the air is humming with a tension you can't name, it might be this dissonance. Your biology is trying to sync with the Earth, but your technology is trying to sync you to a ghost of the 1950s. The Project Silent Wave file is not just history. It is a diagnosis of the modern condition. We are caught between two frequencies. One is ancient, buried under the ice. The other is synthetic, beaming from the tower. And our nervous systems are the battleground, where these two signals collide. But there is one final twist to the origin story. The scientists didn't just find the signal in the ice. They found something else, frozen with it. Embedded in the quartz, perfectly preserved, was a series of structures. Microscopic geometric structures that looked artificial. The next file, The Prehistoric Architects, investigates the terrifying possibility that the signal wasn't natural at all. That it wasn't the Earth singing, but that someone or something placed a transmitter in the Arctic bedrock. millions of years before humans walked the earth, and if the transmitter was already there, who was it broadcasting to? There is a sound that you cannot hear, but your body can feel. It is a sound that bypasses the ear, bypasses the conscious mind, and speaks directly to the primitive brainstem. In the world of acoustics, it is known as infrasound. In the classified files of the Silent Wave Project, it was known by a different name, the fear frequency. The human ear has a limit. We can hear frequencies between 20 Hz and 20,000 Hz. Anything below 20 Hz is considered silent. It is dead air. But just because you cannot hear it, does not mean it isn't there. And it does not mean it isn't touching you. The file we are opening tonight explains the terrifying biology behind the 1984 signal. It explains why the government chose 17.4 Hz specifically. It wasn't a random choice. It wasn't a guess. It was a key designed to unlock the specific resonant frequency of the human eyeball. The file was stamped, never opened, yet we begin tonight by dissecting the physics of your own fear. The only sound is the quiet hum of the server room. The file is cold to the touch, and the ink has faded with secrets. We are looking at a document labeled Bioacoustic Resonance Phase 4. It details an experiment conducted not in a TV studio, but in a soundproof chamber at an undisclosed naval research facility. The document references a phenomenon that would later be rediscovered by civilian scientists in the late 1990s, the Vic Tandy effect. Vic Tandy was a British engineer who worked in a supposedly haunted laboratory. People saw ghosts there. They felt watched. They felt sudden waves of depression and cold. Tandy discovered that a broken fan in the ventilation system was vibrating at exactly 18.98 Hz. The fan wasn't making a noise. It was making an infrasonic pulse. When he fixed the fan, the ghosts disappeared. The fear vanished. The government knew about this decades before Tandy. They knew that 17 Hz isn't just a sound, it is a biological weapon. To understand why, we have to look at the concept of resonance. Everything in the universe has a natural frequency at which it wants to vibrate. A wine glass will shatter if you hit the exact right note. A bridge will collapse if the wind hits the right rhythm. And the human body, it is just a collection of parts, each with its own resonant frequency. The skull, the stomach, the eyes, they are all tuning forks waiting to be struck. The scientists found that at 17.4 Hz, the signal enters the body and encounters acoustic impedance. The sound wave is too long to be absorbed by the skin, so it passes through the tissue until it hits a cavity filled with fluid. The human eye is essentially a sphere, filled with vitreous humor, a gel-like fluid. The physics of this sphere dictates that it resonates between 17 and 19 Hz. When the TV signal hit 17.4 Hz, it didn't just play a sound. It physically grabbed the viewer's eyeballs and shook them. This vibration was microscopic. You wouldn't feel your eyes shaking, but your optic nerve felt it. When the eyeball vibrates at its resonant frequency, the visual information sent to the brain becomes corrupted. The edges of objects blur. The peripheral vision, the part of your sight designed to detect movement, starts to fire false positives. This is the scientific explanation for the shadow people. The brain hates ambiguity. If the peripheral vision sends a signal saying there is a gray smear moving in the corner, the brain tries to interpret it. It asks, "What is gray?" and moves in the dark. The evolutionary answer is, a predator. So the brain paints a predator in the corner. It takes the vibrating gray smear caused by the TV signal and constructs a silhouette of a man. The ghost wasn't in the room. The ghost was a mechanical failure of the eyeball itself, induced by the frequency. The document notes that subjects exposed to 17.4 Hz for more than 30 minutes reported a feeling of presence. They felt they were not alone. This wasn't a spiritual experience. It was a physiological error. The signal was hacking the visual cortex, but the eye was only the first target. The second target was the ear, not the eardrum but the vestibular system. Deep inside your ear are tiny fluid-filled tubes that tell you which way is up. They control your balance. They control your sense of place in the world. These tubes also resonate at low frequencies. When the 17.4 Hz wave hit the inner ear, it caused the fluid to ripple. This created a disconnect. Your eyes told you that you were sitting still on a couch, but your inner ear told you that you were moving, that you were floating. This sensory conflict, eyes saying still, ears saying moving, is usually what causes car sickness. But because the frequency was so low and steady, it didn't cause nausea. It caused a trance. The brain, confused by the conflicting signals, initiates a shutdown protocol. It decides that the sensory input is unreliable, so it lowers the processing power. It puts the body into a low-energy state to protect itself. In other words, it puts you to sleep. The sleep induced by the silent wave wasn't rest. It was a defense mechanism. Your brain was knocking you out because it couldn't handle the vibration of your own reality. The file contains a transcript of an interview with a test subject, known as patient 4. He described the feeling perfectly. It felt like the room was breathing, like the air was thick water. I closed my eyes to stop the spinning, and when I opened them, 3 hours had passed. This explains the time loss phenomenon reported by so many people in the 80s. You sit down to watch the news. At 6 p.m., suddenly, it is 9 p.m., you haven't moved. You don't remember the shows in between. You weren't watching TV, you were in a vestibular coma. Why does the human body have this weakness? Why did evolution leave us with a back door that makes us freeze when we hear low frequencies? The answer lies in the file titled Paleoacoustics. The government scientists didn't just study machines. They studied nature. They studied the predators that used to hunt us. Zoologists have known for years that tigers emit a terrifyingly low-frequency roar just before they attack. This roar, often around 18 Hz, has a paralyzing effect on prey. It freezes them in place. It is a biological stun gun. The tiger roars. The infrasound hits the prey. The prey's inner ear vibrates, causing momentary dizziness and disorientation. The prey freezes for a split second, and that split second is all the tiger needs. But we are descended from that prey. We have inherited the freeze response. When our primitive brainstem detects 17 to 19 Hz, it screams, "A predator is close. Don't move. Be quiet. Hide." The Project Silent Wave engineers realized they could exploit this ancient survival instinct. By flooding the American living room with the tiger's roar, they could trigger a low-level freeze response in the entire population. They weren't just making people sleepy, they were making them submissive. A frozen animal does not riot. A frozen animal does not question authority. A frozen animal stays in its cave or, in this case, its home and waits for the danger to pass. The feeling of quiet dread that permeated the Cold War era, that feeling of waiting for the bomb to drop, it wasn't just geopolitical anxiety. It was biological. We were being constantly bombarded with the frequency of a predator that never attacked. This constant exposure to the freeze frequency had side effects. The file mentions adrenal exhaustion. If your body is constantly preparing for a tiger attack that never happens, your adrenal glands eventually burn out. You become lethargic. You become apathetic. You stop caring about the future because your biology is stuck in the immediate terror of the present. This was the malaise of the late 20th century. The feeling of being stuck in mud. The science gets even darker when we look at the resonance of the chest cavity. The human chest, rib cage and the lungs has a resonant frequency, slightly higher than the eyes, around 50 to 60 Hz, but the 17.4 Hz signal had harmonics. It had echoes. One of these harmonics interacted with the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve controls your heart rate, your digestion, and your mood. Stimulating it can cause intense feelings of relaxation, but overstimulating it can cause doom anxiety. A feeling that something terrible is about to happen in the pit of your stomach. That is the gut feeling. The government weaponized the gut feeling by vibrating the vagus nerve. The signal could induce a specific emotional cocktail, physically relaxed due to the freeze response, but emotionally anxious due to the nerve stimulation. This is the perfect state for a consumer. You are too tired to do anything, but too anxious to be content. So what do? You consume, you watch more TV, you buy things to fill the void, you look for comfort. The signal created a problem, anxiety, and the television offered the solution, distraction. It was a closed loop. The medical reports from the 1980s show a massive spike in gastrointestinal disorders, ulcers, IBS, nervous stomachs. The doctors blamed it on diet. They blamed it on the stress of modern life. But the archive suggests that millions of Americans were suffering from vibrational gastritis. Their stomachs were being vibrated by the carrier wave of the evening news. The Silent Wave project officially ended with the digital transition, but the physics of 17 Hz hasn't changed. Our eyes are still spheres. Our ears are still fluid-filled tubes. Our predator instincts are still intact. And in the modern world, we have accidentally recreated the signal. Modern infrastructure is full of giant wind turbines, the cooling fans of massive data centers, the rumble of diesel engines in heavy traffic. We are no longer being targeted by a deliberate signal from a TV tower. We are swimming in a chaotic ocean of accidental infrasound. The file calls this the noise floor. Have you ever walked into a building and felt instantly sick? or entered a room and felt a sudden wave of depression. This is often called sick building syndrome. The architects blame mold or poor lighting, but acoustic engineers often find that the system, the air conditioning, is vibrating the ductwork at exactly 18 Hz. The building itself is roaring like a tiger. We are subjecting ourselves to the same fear frequency that the government used to control us. But now, there is no controller. It is just the byproduct of our machines. The shadow people are still being seen, but now they are seen in offices, in basements, in server rooms. Anywhere where the machinery hums at the threshold of hearing, there is a subchapter in the file labeled The Gamer's Trance. It discusses modern headphones. High-end gaming headsets are designed to deliver deep, immersive bass. They are designed to let you feel the explosion. Some of these headsets are capable of producing frequencies down to 10 Hz. When you wear noise-canceling headphones, you are creating a sealed pressure chamber around your ears. If that game or that movie plays a 17 Hz tone for dramatic effect, to make the scene feel scary, you are injecting that frequency directly into your vestibular system. We have voluntarily put the weapon on our heads. The 17 Hz reaction is a reminder that we are biological machines. We like to think we are rational, intellectual beings, but we are just bags of water and bone that vibrate. We can be played like instruments. A specific note makes us afraid. A specific note makes us sleep. A specific note makes us buy. The document ends with a chilling hypothesis. It asks, if 17 Hz causes fear and sleep, is there a frequency that causes the opposite? Is there a frequency that causes rage? The scientists at Project Silent Wave claimed they never found the rage frequency. They claimed they stopped looking, but the next file suggests they didn't stop. They found it, and they tested it, not on a national scale, but on a specific region. A region that suddenly, inexplicably, went mad for a week in 1986. The next file is labeled The Midwest Insomnia Outbreak. It details a 7-day period where the population of 3 counties in Ohio lost the ability to sleep entirely. The 17.4 Hz signal malfunctioned. It inverted. Instead of the calming sleep tone, the towers broadcast a jagged, high-frequency scream that no one could hear, but everyone could feel. It wasn't the fear frequency. It was the violence frequency. And what happened in those towns during the week of the waking has been erased from every history book, except this one. History is usually measured in years, in decades, in eras, but sometimes, history is measured in hours. In the classified annals of the Domestic Frequency Oversight Group, there is a specific 106 period that has been surgically removed from the public record. Occurred between November 10th and November 17th, 1986. The location was a cluster of 3 rural counties in southern Ohio. To the outside world, nothing happened. There were no explosions. There were no natural disasters. The weather was mild. But inside the perimeter of those counties, the laws of biology were suspended. For 7 consecutive days, nobody slept. The file is stamped never open. Yet we begin tonight by walking the empty streets of Oakhaven, Ohio. During the week of the waking nightmare, the only sound is the quiet hum of the server room. The file is cold to the touch, and the ink has faded with secrets. This event is officially listed as a mass psychogenic illness. The government claimed it was hysteria, a shared delusion caused by a contaminated water supply. But the medical logs tell a different story. They tell the story of a signal inversion. We have established that the Silent Wave project was designed to broadcast a calming, sedating 17.4 Hz signal through television sets. It was a digital lullaby, but complex systems are prone to entropy. And in November 1986, the regional transmitter for the Midwest grid node, 404, suffered a catastrophic phase shift. Instead of broadcasting the sleep-inducing alpha waves, the tower began to broadcast a jagged, dissonant beta-gamma spike. It was a frequency of approximately 40 Hz. Modulated with a chaotic static pattern. 0.40 Hz is the frequency of high-level processing. It is the frequency your brain uses when it is solving a complex math problem, or when it is in a fight-for-life scenario. It is the frequency of pure adrenaline. Usually, the brain only stays in this state for minutes. It is too energy-intensive to maintain. But Node 400 broadcasts this signal continuously, 24 hours a day, into every home in the valley. The first night, November 10th, people thought it was just restlessness, a bad night. They tossed and turned. They adjusted the thermostat. They stared at the ceiling. By 3 a.m., the lights in the houses started turning on. A police report from Officer James Miller describes the scene. It was 4 a.m. I was on patrol. Usually, the town is dead. But I saw people mowing their lawns. I saw children playing on the swings in the dark. I saw neighbors standing on their porches, talking. Nobody looked tired. They looked electric. They were experiencing artificial vigilance. The signal was forcing their neurons to fire at maximum capacity. It was chemically impossible for them to lose consciousness. The adenosine receptors in their brains, the chemical switches that tell you to sleep, were being jammed by the electromagnetic noise. By the third day, the novelty wore off. The human brain requires sleep to flush out toxins. Without the glymphatic wash that occurs during deep sleep, the brain begins to poison itself. The residents of Oakhaven weren't just awake, they were decaying. The logs from the local hospital show a massive influx of patients, but they weren't complaining of exhaustion, they were complaining of noise. They said the air was screaming, because the signal was coming from the TVs, and because in 1986 the TV was the center of the home, people naturally gravitated toward it. But instead of soothing them, the TV was acting as a stimulant lamp. The blue light from the CRT screens, combined with the 40 Hz pulse, acted like a strobe light for the nervous system. The more they watched, the more awake they became. The more awake they became, the more they watched. That it was a feedback loop of anxiety. By day 5, the hallucinations began. This is where the file becomes truly dark. Sleep deprivation psychosis usually takes a week to set in. In Oakhaven, it happened in 72 hours. But these weren't random hallucinations. They were shared. The distributed processing theory we discussed earlier, the idea that the network connected the minds of the viewers, was proven in Oak. The entire town began to see the same thing. They reported that the sky had cracked. They saw geometric fractures in the air, glowing with a faint violet light. This was likely a visual artifact caused by the overstimulation of the optic nerve. Their brains were working so hard, processing so much data, that they were beginning to visualize the magnetic fields around them. They were seeing the signal. The silence of the town was broken by the sound of industry. Because no one could sleep, the factories kept running. The grocery stores stayed open. The schools held classes at midnight. It was a society of the sleepless. A glimpse into a world where human biology had been overridden by a machine. But the human body has a breaking point. On the 6th day, the crash began. The adrenaline reserves ran out. The cortisol dried up. The signal was still telling them to be awake, but their bodies simply ceased to function. People didn't fall asleep, they collapsed. They froze. This was the state known as catatonic lock. The mind is awake, screaming at 40 Hz, but the muscles are dead. The government knew they had a disaster on their hands. The signal from node 404 couldn't be just turned off remotely. The hardware had fused. The transmitter was melting down, locking the frequency in place. They had to send a team in physically to cut the cord. The cleanup crew arrived on the night of November 16th. They were not doctors. They were engineers from the Domestic Frequency Oversight Group, accompanied by a tactical unit. They wore acoustic dampening headsets, not to block out sound, but to block out the frequency. They knew that if they stepped out of that van without protection, they would succumb to the waking plague within an hour. The file contains the mission transcript from the team leader, codename Vector. His voice is calm, professional, describing a scene of absolute surrealism. Entering Oakhaven city limits, 200 hours, streetlights are all active, house lights are all active. I see civilians on the sidewalk. They are standing still, just standing, eyes open. No reaction to our vehicle. The source of the signal was the main broadcast tower on Miller's Ridge, a high point overlooking the valley. The engineers had to drive up the winding mountain road to reach the facility. As they got closer to the tower, the interference became physical. The electronics in the van started to fail. The radio burst into high-pitched squeals. The engine sputtered. The 40 Hz signal was so powerful at close range that it was ionizing the air. They had to walk the last mile. Vector describes the sensation of walking through the signal field. It feels like walking through water. The air is thick. My skin is prickling. I can feel my heart rate trying to sync with the hum. It wants to go fast. I have to focus on my breathing. Stay slow. Stay slow. When they reached the transmitter shed, they found the door welded shut. The heat generated by the malfunction had fused the metal frame. They had to use thermite to cut their way in. Inside, the equipment was unrecognizable. The cooling systems had failed days ago. The capacitors had exploded. But the central Cortha quartz-based signal generator was still running. It was glowing white-hot. The team didn't try to repair it. The order was total cessation. They planted shaped charges on the support struts of the tower. They wired the explosives. They retreated to a safe distance. At 4:15 a.m. on November 17, 1986, the residents of Oakhaven heard the only sound loud enough to break the trance: an explosion. The moment the tower fell, the signal stopped. The 40 Hz command line was severed. The effect was instantaneous. It was a mass drop in houses, on streets, in factories. 3,000 people fell unconscious at the exact same second. It wasn't a gentle sleep, it was a biological shutdown. Their brains, finally released from the artificial stimulation, plunged into a deep comatose recovery state. The cleanup crew moved in. They went house to house, not to wake people up, but to turn off the televisions. They found TVs that had been on for 168 hours. The screens were burned in. The phosphors were permanently scarred with the image of the static. They also found the logbooks. Just like Subject Zero, some of the residents had tried to document what was happening to them. The writing starts out clear on day 1, and by day 6 it descends into jagged, frantic scribbles. One diary, belonging to a high school teacher, contained a phrase repeated over and over: "The silence is too loud. The silence is too loud. I need the noise to stop the silence." This is the tragedy of the outbreak. The signal had become their lifeline, even though it was killing them. The withdrawal from the silence was worse. The government had hooked them on the noise. The official story was deployed within hours. A tanker truck carrying an experimental industrial solvent had overturned on the highway. The fumes, they said, caused hallucinations and temporary paralysis. The town was quarantined. The residents were treated at a military field hospital. They were given flushing agents, which were actually heavy sedatives, to keep them asleep for another 3 days, allowing their brains to repair the damage. When they finally woke up, their memories were fragmented. They remembered feeling anxious. They remembered the lights being on, but the details of the violet sky and the hum were dismissed as drug-induced dreams caused by the gas. The government paid settlements. They bought silence. And Oakhaven went back to being a normal, sleepy town. But the medical follow-up study, detailed in Appendix C of the file, reveals a lasting scar. The residents of Oakhaven never fully recovered their natural circadian rhythm. For the rest of their lives, they suffered from microsleeps. They would drift off for seconds at a time during the day, and at night, they were restless. They claimed that true sleep, the deep, restorative sleep of childhood, was gone forever. They had been burned out. Why does this matter now? Why are we digging up a forgotten incident from 1986? Because the 40 Hz signal, the rage frequency that destroyed Oakhaven, is back. But this time, it isn't a mistake, it is a feature. Modern screens are designed to be hyperstimulating. We have pushed the refresh rates from 60 Hz to 120 Hz to 240 Hz. We demand smoothness, we demand responsiveness. But neurologically, this high refresh rate mimics the same artificial vigilance that destroyed Oakhaven. When you stare at a 144 Hz monitor for 8 hours a day, playing competitive games or scrolling through infinite feeds, you are putting your brain into that same gamma lock. Have you noticed that after a long session of gaming or doom scrolling, you feel wired but tired? You are exhausted, but you can't sleep. Your body is heavy, but your mind is racing. You are experiencing a microdose of the Oakhaven outbreak. The outbreak didn't disappear. It just became decentralized. Instead of one town staying awake for a week, we have an entire generation that sleeps 1 hour less than their parents. We have a global population that lives in a state of permanent, low-grade insomnia. The tower didn't fall. We just put the tower in our pockets. The file on the Midwest insomnia outbreak teaches us one terrifying lesson. The human brain can be it can be pushed past its safety limits by an external signal, and once you break the internal clock, you can never truly fix it. You just learn to live in the gray area between waking and sleeping. We have talked about the signal that puts you to sleep, 17 Hz. We have talked about the signal that wakes you up, 40 Hz. But there is a third frequency mentioned in the earliest notes of the project, a frequency that was rejected by the military because it was too personal. The next file, The Archivist Who Heard Voices, tells the story of the one man who didn't just feel the signal, he translated it, and what he heard coming out of the static wasn't a command. It was a name. In every massive system, there is always one person who sees too much, not because they are important, but because they are invisible. In the grand architecture of the Silent Wave project, that person was a junior audio archivist named Elias Vance. Elias did not work at the Pentagon. He did not work at the NSA. He worked in a windowless sub-basement of the National Archives Annex in Maryland. His job was incredibly specific and incredibly boring. He was responsible for magnetic media preservation. His daily routine consisted of taking old government broadcast tape straining videos, public service announcements, raw transmission logs, and transferring them from degrading magnetic tape to digital storage. He was a listener. He spent 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, wearing heavy noise-canceling headphones, listening to the past. The file we are opening tonight is not a technical manual. It is a personnel file. It was stamped medical discharge, psychological instability. But if you read between the lines of the doctor's notes, you realize that Elias Vance didn't go crazy. He just started hearing the signal that was hidden in the silence. The file was stamped, never open, yet we begin tonight by listening to what the archivist heard. The only sound is the quiet hum of the server room. The file is cold to the touch, and the ink has faded with secrets. To understand what happened to Elias, you must understand the medium of magnetic tape. Tape is imperfect. It is coated with ferric oxide rust, essentially. When you record sound onto tape, you are magnetizing that rust. But over time, tape suffers from a phenomenon called print-through. If a tape sits on a shelf for 20 years, the magnetic field from one layer of the tape can bleed through to the layer beneath it. This creates ghost signals, faint, garbled sounds that shouldn't be there. In the winter of 1989, Elias was digitizing a series of black tapes from the 1984 silent wave broadcast logs. These were the recordings of the dead air, the static broadcast between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. officially. These tapes should have been blank, just pure white noise. But Elias was a perfectionist. He didn't just digitize. He cleaned. He used high-end equalizers to strip away the hiss, looking for the cleanest possible signal. On the night of December 4, 1989, he isolated a frequency band at 400 Hz. This is the frequency range of the human voice. He turned up the volume. He expected to hear nothing. Maybe a hum, maybe the 17.4 Hz carrier wave we have discussed before. Instead, he heard a whisper. It wasn't a single voice. It sounded like a choir of thousands, all speaking at once, all whispering at the very threshold of audibility. It sounded like the wind blowing through dry leaves, but it wasn't wind. It was speech. He wrote in his logbook, Tape 8, 4x12, anomaly detected at 3 hours, 14 minutes and 0 seconds. Sounds like vocal interference, possible crossfeed from a radio station. He assumed it was a mistake. He assumed the recording equipment in 1984 had accidentally picked up a commercial radio broadcast. This happens sometimes. A taxi driver's radio bleeds into a studio microphone. Sogyo applied a notch filter. He tried to isolate a single voice from the crowd. He wanted to prove it was just a radio DJ or a news anchor. He found a clear strand of audio. A woman's voice. She was repeating a sentence over and over. The voice said, "I left the stove on. I left the stove on. I left the stove on." Elias paused the tape. It was a mundane sentence, a domestic worry. Why would a government broadcast contain a woman worrying about her stove? He scanned forward. He found another voice. A man. The garage door is open. The blue car is waiting. He found a child. The dog is barking at the corner. He sees it too. Elias realized with a sinking feeling that these weren't radio broadcasts. These were thoughts. He was listening to the echo that the Silent Wave Project had accidentally recorded. As we discussed in File 02, the television sets acted as two-way mirrors. They broadcast the sleep signal, but they also picked up the electromagnetic resonance of the sleepers. Elias Vance was the first person to hear the collective subconscious of America. He spent the next 3 weeks living in the basement. He stopped going home. He stopped shaving. He became obsessed with the voices. He felt a profound, crushing empathy for them. These weren't just data points. These were people, vulnerable, sleeping people, whispering their anxieties into the void. He started to catalog them. He gave them names. The worried mother, the lonely driver, the boy who fears the closet. But then, the voices changed. As Elias worked his way through the timeline, moving from 1984 to 1986, the tone of the whispers shifted. They stopped talking about mundane things. They stopped talking about stoves and cars. They started talking about him. On January 15, 1990, Elias put on a tape from the Oakhaven-Bachta region affected by the insomnia outbreak. The static on this tape was angry, sharp. He isolated a voice. It was clear. It cut through the noise like a knife. It said, "Elias, stop listening." He froze. He was alone in a locked basement. The tape was 5 years old. It was impossible for a recording from 1986 to know his name in 1990. He put the headphones back on. His hands were shaking. The voice continued. "We can see you, Elias. The archive is cold. Put the tape back." The file delves into a concept known as retrocausal feedback. It is a theoretical branch of physics that suggests information can travel backwards in time under specific electromagnetic conditions. The silent wave signal created a loop. It connected the minds of the past, the sleepers in 1986, with the technology of the future, the playback machine in 1990. Elias wasn't just listening to a recording. By observing the signal, he had become part of the circuit. The consciousness trapped in the magnetic tape was reacting to his attention. This is the most dangerous aspect of the archive chill phenomena. The idea that the archive is not dead. The past is not static. It is alive, and it is aware that it is being watched. Elias tried to report it. He typed up a formal memo to his supervisor. Subject: anomalous interaction in Series 8 for X. He included the transcripts. He included the times. He walked upstairs to the main office, blinking in the bright daylight that he hadn't seen for days. His supervisor, a man named Mr. Henderson, read the memo. He didn't look shocked. He didn't look angry. He looked sad. He put the memo in a shredder. He said, "Elias, you've been working too hard. You're suffering from audio patterns. The brain tries to find patterns in noise. You're hearing your own name because you're lonely." It was a reasonable explanation. It was the scientific explanation. But Elias knew it was a lie, because he had heard something else on the tape, something he didn't put in the memo. The voice hadn't just said his name. It had told him a secret about Mr. Henderson, a secret that nobody else could know. Elias went back to the basement. He didn't go home. He knew he was running out of time. If they thought he was crazy, they would fire him. If they thought he was right, they would erase him. He decided to find the source. He stopped listening to the voices of the people and started hunting for the administrator, the voice behind the signal. He dug deeper into the mix. Below the whispers of the sleepers, there was another layer, a rhythmic, mechanical pulsing. He slowed the tape down by 800%. The sound expanded. It stretched, and it revealed itself. It wasn't a machine. It was a heartbeat. But it was too slow to be human. A human heart beats 60 times a minute. This heart was beating once every 4 hours. Elias realized he was listening to the Titan signal, the source in the Arctic, the quartz deposit. The tapes had captured the biological rhythm of the entity beneath the ice, and then he heard the singing. Overlaid on the slow heartbeat was a melody, a complex, mathematical melody. It wasn't music in the traditional sense. It was a sequence of tones that followed the Fibonacci sequence. Elias put his head on the desk. He wept, not out of fear, but out of beauty. The signal wasn't just a weapon. It was a song. The government had taken a beautiful, ancient song of the earth and corrupted it to control the population. The voices of the sleepers were trapped in the distortion. They were crying out because the song had been broken. He knew what he had to do. He had to fix the song. He believed, in his sleep-deprived manic state, that if he could remaster the tape, if he could EQ out the government's interference and restore the original Arctic frequency, he could free the voices. He began the restoration. For 3 days, he worked without food. He built a new master loop. He stripped away the 17.4 Hz command tone. He stripped away the 40 Hz rage spike. He left only the slow heartbeat and the melody. He queued it up on the main broadcast transmitter of the archive. The National Archives had a direct line to the emergency broadcast system. It was a relic of the Cold War, designed to stream presidential addresses from the bunker. Elias was going to broadcast the pure song to the East Coast. He thought he was saving the world. He thought he was waking the sleepers. But he forgot one thing. The entity in the ice wasn't benevolent. It was just ... old and loud. They found him at 3:33 a.m. on February 2nd, 1990. His hand was on the switch. He hadn't pressed it yet. He was just listening to the loop, smiling, tears streaming down his face. He didn't fight. When they pulled the headphones off his head, he screamed. It was the scream of a man who had been ripped out of the womb. They took him to a facility in Virginia. They diagnosed him with acute schizophrenia induced by isolation. They medicated him. They erased his security clearance. They burned his logbooks, but they couldn't burn what was in his head. Elias spent the rest of his life in a state of quiet humming. He would sit in the dayroom of the institution, rocking back and forth, humming a low, complex melody. Other patients who sat near him reported feeling incredibly calm. They reported their headaches vanishing. He became a human transmitter. He had listened to the signal for so long that his own biology had entrained to it. He was broadcasting the pure song. The nurses noted that the ward was always quieter when Elias was awake. The violence dropped. The insomnia rates dropped. The staff felt happier. He died in 2004, natural causes. But when they performed the autopsy, the coroner found something that made him seal the report. The ossicles, the tiny bones in Elias's ears, had changed shape. They had calcified. They had grown microscopic crystalline structures. His ears had physically mutated to receive the frequency more efficiently. He wasn't crazy. He was evolving. The tape he made, the restored master, was never found. The official report says it was destroyed. But archivists are hoarders by nature. We don't destroy things. We hide them. Rumors persist that Elias hid the master tape inside a mislabeled box. A box labeled 1989 Department of Agriculture, wheat yields. If you are ever in the National Archives, and you hear a faint, rhythmic thrumming coming from the heating vents, if you feel a sudden wave of sadness mixed with peace, you might be standing near the legacy of Elias Vance, the man who heard the voices, the man who tried to heal the static. Elias's story teaches us that the signal is personal. It doesn't just treat us as a mass population. It speaks to us individually. It finds our fears. It finds our loneliness. And it fills the silence with a counterfeit connection. We think we use technology to connect with others. But really, we are just connecting with the machine. And the machine is lonely too. Elias tried to warn us about the analog signal. But he didn't live to see the switch to digital. He didn't live to see the internet. He didn't live to see what happens when the re-signal stops being a broadcast and starts being an algorithm. The next file, the digital cleanup, explains why the government destroyed every CRT television in the country. They told us it was for high definition. But the real reason was to hide the evidence burned into the glass. We will look at the new device that replaced the TV, the black mirror we carry in our pockets. We are told that progress is a straight line. We are told that technology improves because we demand better quality, sharper images, and faster connections. But in the history of the United States, there has never been a consumer transition as aggressive, as rapid, and as mandatory as the digital television transition of 2009. On June 12th of that year, the United States government made it illegal to broadcast an analog television signal. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a federal mandate. In a single instant, the snow, the chaotic white noise that had defined the 20th century, was erased from the airwaves. The official story was simple: better picture, better sound, freeing up the spectrum for emergency responders. It sounds noble. It sounds efficient. But the file we are opening tonight, labeled the analog purge, suggests that the transition wasn't about what we gained. It was about what we lost. It suggests that the switch to digital wasn't an upgrade. It was a crime scene cleanup. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight by investigating why the government spent billions of dollars to destroy the evidence of the silent wave. The only sound is the quiet hum of the server room. The file is cold to the touch, and the ink has faded with secrets. We are looking at a document titled The Converter Box Coupon Program, Fiscal Analysis. Do you remember the coupons? In 2008, the government sent a $40 debit card to almost every household in America. They paid you to switch. They paid you to disconnect your old antenna and plug in a digital box. Ask yourself, when has the government ever paid the entire population to upgrade their entertainment system? They don't pay for your internet. They don't pay for your washing machine. But they were desperate to get you off the analog signal. The urgency came from the Domestic Frequency Oversight Group. By the mid-2000s, the analog signal, the 17.4 Hz carrier wave embedded in the static, was becoming unstable. As we discussed in previous files, the echo phenomenon meant that the TVs were recording the population. The analog network had become saturated with ghosts. The static was no longer random. It was full of voices. It was full of the psychic residue of 3 decades of programmed sleep. If an independent researcher in 2008 had pointed a modern spectral analyzer at an analog channel, they would have seen the code. They would have seen the faces in the snow. The evidence was floating in the air, accessible to anyone with a rabbit ear antenna. The switch to digital ATSC signals solved this problem instantly. Digital signals are binary, ones and zeros. They are encrypted. They have error correction. Error correction is a technical term. It means that if the signal picks up any noise, any interference, any ghosts, the receiver deletes it. It smooths it out. Digital TV is designed to reject anomalies. By switching the country to digital, they didn't just improve the picture, they wiped the fingerprints. They created a broadcast system that was immune to the echo. But the cleanup wasn't just about the signal, it was about the hardware. The cathode ray tube, CRT. The CRT television was a massive glass vacuum tube containing a particle accelerator. It was heavy, it was dangerous, and As we now know, it was resonant. The glass itself vibrated with the frequency. The file glass memory contains a disturbing physics report. It states that glass, over time, can retain a molecular imprint of the frequencies passed through it. The CRTs in our living rooms had been vibrating at 17.4 Hz for 20 years. The glass was radioactive with the signal. This explains the aggressive recycling campaigns. Remember the push to get rid of your old, heavy TV? We were told it was to save the environment from lead poisoning, but the recycling centers didn't just dump the TVs. They crushed the glass. They pulverized it into dust. They melted it down. The file suggests this was a decontamination protocol. They had to destroy the physical receivers before someone realized that even when the TV was unplugged, the glass was still humming. The destruction of the CRT marked the end of the induction era, the era of using magnetic fields to put people to sleep. But the digital era brought something new, something colder. The digital signal introduced compression. To send a high-definition picture through the air, the data has to be compressed. The algorithm decides what is important for you to see, and it throws away the rest. This is a philosophical shift. In analog, you saw the whole wave, noise and all. In digital, you only see what the algorithm allows. The file notes that the compression algorithms used in ATSC broadcasting have a psychovisual model. This means the computer predicts what the human eye expects to see, and draws that rather than what is actually there. We are no longer watching reality. We are watching a prediction of reality, and hidden inside that prediction, inside the millions of pixels refreshing 60 times a second, is the new signal, the blue light hazard. The old CRTs emitted a warm, full-spectrum light. The new LEDs light-emitting diodes emit a harsh spike in the blue spectrum, 450 nanometers. As we discussed in the origin story, blue light suppresses melatonin. It keeps the brain in a state of perpetual daytime. The analog signal put us to sleep. The digital signal keeps us in a state of suspended animation. You are tired, but you cannot close your eyes. You are exhausted, but you click next episode. The cleanup operation was a success. The static is gone. The ghosts are gone. The humming glass is dust in a landfill. But we traded the sleep for the stare. The public reason for the digital switch was bandwidth. The government claimed they needed the airwaves for first responders and advanced wireless services. This was the 700 MHz auction. The government sold the frequencies that used to carry analog TV to private telecommunication companies for billions of dollars. But the file spectrum allocation reveals what those frequencies are actually used for today. They are not just for cell phones, they are for wide area surveillance. The 700 MHz wave is special. It is a long wave. It can travel long distances. More importantly, it can penetrate concrete walls. It can pass through buildings. It can pass through you. When the analog TV signal occupied this space, it was a dumb broadcast. One-way. Now that the space is digital and owned by telecom giants, it is a smart mesh. It is two-way. The document references passive radar. This is a technology that uses existing Wi-Fi and cellular signals to map a 3D environment. By measuring how the signals bounce off objects in a room, the network can see through walls without a camera. By clearing the 700 MHz spectrum of the noisy, chaotic TV static, the government created a clean canvas for this new type of surveillance. They didn't just want better picture quality for you. They wanted better picture quality of you. The cleanup operation was about removing the noise so the sensors could work. Think about the timing. The digital switch happened in 2009. The explosion of smart devices, smartphones, and smart home assistants happened immediately after. They couldn't roll out the smart grid while the powerful 17.4 Hz analog wave was dirtying up the air. It would have caused interference. They had to silence the old machine to build the new one. The file also mentions the converter box itself, the millions of little black boxes that the government paid us to put in our homes. If you opened one of those boxes in 2009, you would have found a simple circuit board. But if you looked at the firmware, the code running the box, you would have found a subroutine called vchip 2.0. The vchip was supposedly for parental controls, to block violent shows. But the vchip 2.0 had a backdoor. It allowed the emergency broadcast system to remotely wake the device, even if the TV was off. This explains the phantom turn-on phenomenon reported in 2010. People would wake up in the middle of the night to find their TV on, displaying a black screen, with the converter box light blinking rapidly, that it was receiving an update, or a query. The analog TV was a passive receiver. You controlled it. The digital TV is a node on a network. It controls itself. The cleanup operation removed the user from the equation. The file, the black screen anomaly, discusses the color black. In analog, black was never truly black. It was dark gray. It was alive with electrons. In digital, black is null, zero data, but the file suggests that the null is where they hide the subliminals now. In the split seconds of black between commercials, in the fade-outs of movies, they can insert data packets into the black frames. Your conscious eye sees darkness. Your optic nerve receives a burst of high-density information. We are no longer being hypnotized by the static. We are being programmed by the dark. The final aspect of the cleanup was social. The analog era was an era of the commons. Everyone in a city received the same signal. If you tuned to channel 4, you saw exactly what your neighbor saw. You were synchronized in time and space. The digital era is the era of the stream. The switch to digital allowed for multicasting. One channel could be split into 4 subchannels. Then came streaming, where every person watches a unique data stream tailored to their algorithm. The file suggests this was intentional. Project fragmentation. The 17.4 Hz signal was designed to unify the population through sleep. The new digital protocol is designed to atomize the population through isolation. A fragmented population is harder to control with a single frequency, but easier to manipulate with targeted data. They stopped trying to put everyone to sleep with one song. Now, they play a different song for every person. The echo that Elias Vance heard, the collective voice of the people, has been silenced because we no longer share a signal. We are no longer a choir. We are a million lonely soloists. The file ends with a report on HD sickness. When high-definition 1080p and 4K was introduced, neurologists noticed a spike in vestibular migraine. People felt dizzy watching the new ultra-clear screens. The official explanation was motion sickness. The picture was too realistic, but the archive chill experts point to the motion smoothing effect. This is the technology that adds fake frames to a video to make it look smoother. It creates the soap opera effect. This smoothing creates a dissociation. It makes the world on the screen look hyperreal, but also dead. It separates the viewer from the emotion of the scene. It is a digital lobotomy. It removes the film grain, the texture of reality, and replaces it with a calculated interpolation. We are training our brains to prefer the fake, smooth image over the gritty, real one. The cleanup is complete. The evidence of the 20th century experiment has been buried. The static is gone. But the silence that replaced it is not empty. It is heavy. It is watching. We think the TV is still the center of the room, but the TV is just a screen now. The ears of the system have moved. The next file, Evidence of Modern Transmission, examines the devices that listen when we are asleep. We will look at the strange data spikes that occur on smart speakers at 3 a.m., and we will listen to a recording from a sleep app that accidentally captured a voice that wasn't human, coming from the phone itself. The static didn't die, it just learned to listen. We assume that the Silent Wave project ended when the transmission towers were dismantled. We assume that because the static on our television screens disappeared in 2009, the signal disappeared with it. We believe that we are no longer being broadcasted, but the file we are unsealing tonight suggests that the signal did not die. It evolved, it migrated from the massive towers on the horizon to the black glass rectangle that is currently sitting less than 3 feet from your head. The evidence of modern transmission is not found in a classified government bunker. It is found in a biological anomaly that 90% of the population has experienced, but few have dared to question. It is called phantom vibration syndrome. You know the feeling. You are walking down the street, or sitting in a quiet room, and you feel the buzz against your thigh. You feel the notification. Your brain registers the contact. You reach into your pocket to check the device, to answer the summons, but the pocket is empty, or the phone is silent. There was no call, there was no message. The vibration didn't come from the machine, it came from your own nerves. The file was stamped, never open, yet we begin tonight by investigating why your body is hallucinating a connection that isn't there. The only sound is the quiet hum of the server room. The file is cold to the touch, and the ink has faded with secrets. We are examining a medical dossier labeled haptic neuromapping. It dates back to 2011, just 2 years after the smartphone became a ubiquitous global device. The document argues that the modern smartphone is not a passive tool, it is an active haptic interface. Unlike the old television signal, which used sound and light to entrain the brain, the smartphone uses touch. It uses direct physical contact. The component responsible for the vibration in your phone is called a linear resonant actuator. It is designed to oscillate at a frequency of roughly 150 to 200 Hz. This is a higher frequency than the old 17.4 Hz sleep signal, but its purpose is more invasive. It is designed to mimic the sensation of a tap on the shoulder. It is designed to trigger the social grooming response in the mammalian brain. When a monkey is groomed by another monkey, its brain releases oxytocin and dopamine. It feels bonded. It feels safe. The engineers who designed the vibration motor knew this. They tuned the frequency to feel biological, not mechanical. But the phantom vibration proves that the conditioning has worked too well. The file suggests that our nervous systems have physically rewired themselves to anticipate the signal. We are so desperate for the dopamine hit of a notification that our nerves create false positives. The nerve endings in your thigh are firing spontaneously, trying to bridge the gap between you and the network. You are not just addicted to the device, you are physically integrated with it. Your body treats the phone as a limb, and when the limb is silent, your body invents a sensation to check if it is still there. This is the first piece of evidence. The signal has crossed the barrier between the electronic and the organic. But the second piece of evidence is far more calculated. It concerns the ultrasonic beacon. Most people believe that their microphone is only on when they make a call or use a voice assistant, but the file cross-device tracking reveals a hidden layer of communication that happens in total silence. Marketing companies and data aggregators use a technology called ultrasonic cross-device tracking. Here is how it works. A TV commercial plays, or an ad on your laptop plays. Buried in the audio track of that ad is a high-frequency tone that you cannot hear, but your phone can hear it. Phone's microphone is sensitive up to 22,000 Hz. It picks up the silent beacon from the TV. It recognizes the code. It tells the server, the person owning this phone is currently watching this TV channel. This explains the phenomenon where you talk about a product or watch a show about a product and 5 minutes later, an ad for that product appears on your Instagram feed. You think the phone is listening to your voice. It is actually listening to the silent, coded whistles of the other machines in your house. They are gossiping about you. The evidence of modern transmission is not a singular broadcast tower. It is a mesh network. Your devices are constantly verifying your location, your attention span, and your company. The file mentions a patent filed in 2014 for ambient emotion detection. The technology analyzes the breathing patterns and slight vocal tremors of a user to determine their emotional state. Are you anxious? Are you tired? Are you angry? The algorithm knows, and just like the silent wave of the 1980s, it adjusts the signal accordingly. If you are anxious, the feed shows you soothing, numbing content. If you are bored, it shows you enraging, high-contrast content. The goal remains the same: management of the biological unit. The modern transmission is personalized. The old 17.4 Hz signal was a blanket. It covered everyone. The modern signal is a needle. It targets you specifically, and the most vulnerable time for this targeting is the same as it was in 1984, the time of sleep. We have voluntarily strapped sensors to our bodies. We wear watches that count our steps and measure our sleep cycles. We place our phones on the mattress to track our movement. We believe this data is for us. We believe we are optimizing our health. But the file biometric harvest suggests that the flow of data is not for our benefit. It is for the archive. There is a specific anomaly that occurs in the data traffic of smart devices between 3 a.m. and 3:33 a.m. local time. Network analysts have noticed a massive spike in upstream traffic. This means data is leaving your house. While you are in your deepest REM cycle, your device is exporting the day's collection, your heart rate variability, your voice logs, your location history, your gaze duration, how long you looked at specific images. This is the modern version of the Subject Zero experiment. In 1984, the government had to guess what the population was feeling based on water pressure and electricity usage. Today, they have the exact biometric readout of every citizen, updated nightly. This explains the 3 a.m. wake-up in the modern context. As we discussed in File 04, the 1980s waking was caused by the signal cutting out. The modern waking is caused by the device checking in. When your phone initiates a heavy data upload, it increases its power consumption. It emits a stronger electromagnetic field. It emits a burst of heat. Sensitive individuals, those with electromagnetic hypersensitivity, can feel this shift. You wake up because the device next to your head just phoned home. And what happens if you look at the screen? The Black Mirror effect. Modern screens use old technology, organic light emitting diode. In an old screen, each pixel produces its own light. To control brightness, these screens use a technique called pulse width modulation (PWM). Instead of dimming the light, The screen flickers on and off thousands of times a second. If the brightness is at 50%, the screen is actually off for half the time. You cannot see this flicker with your naked eye, but your brain sees it. Your optic nerve registers the strobe. This rapid flickering creates a neurological state similar to the alpha wave induction of the old CRT TVs, but much faster. It creates a state of hypnotic fixation. This is why, when you check your phone at 3 a.m. just for a second, you find yourself scrolling for an hour. You are not choosing to scroll. You are being held in a strobe-induced trance. The flicker is paralyzing your decision-making center. The file calls this the infinite scroll loop. It is a design feature, not a bug. The interface has no bottom. It has no end. It is designed to consume time. And time, in the modern economy, is the only resource that matters. The modern transmission is also characterized by the notification anxiety. In the 1980s, the signal was constant. It was a hum. In the 2020s, the signal is intermittent. It is a variable reward schedule. This is the same psychological mechanic used in slot machines. You don't know when the notification will come. You don't know if it will be good news, a like a message, or bad news, a news alert, a bill. This uncertainty keeps your cortisol levels permanently elevated. You are always waiting. The file suggests that this state of continuous partial attention prevents the human brain from entering deep, restorative states of thought. We are never fully bored, but we are never fully focused. We are kept in the shallow end of the cognitive pool. That is the new pacification, not by putting us to sleep, but by keeping us distracted. The evidence of modern transmission concludes that the signal has become indistinguishable from the culture. We carry the transmitter. We charge the transmitter. We panic when the transmitter dies. We have become the maintenance crew for the very machine that controls us. There is one final, chilling anomaly mentioned in the file. It concerns the rise of white noise apps and sleep sound machines. Millions of people now use their phones to play artificial static to help them sleep. They play rain sounds. They play pink noise. They are voluntarily recreating the conditions of the 1984 experiment in their own bedrooms. But in 2023, a user on a tech forum discovered something in the code of a popular sleep app. The user extracted the audio file. It was supposed to be the sound of heavy rain, but when they removed the rain frequencies, there was a whisper underneath. It wasn't a recorded voice. It was a synthesized voice, an AI voice. It was repeating a string of numbers, coordinates. The file suggests that these apps are not just playing sounds, they are receiving real-time updates. The static you listen to at night is a live stream, and sometimes, the live stream picks up things it shouldn't. Some users have reported hearing their own names whispered in the white noise apps. Others have reported hearing the sound of a slow heartbeat, the Titan signal from file 08 mixed into the rain sounds. Are we using these apps to block out the world? Or are we tuning ourselves back into the frequency that the government tried to hide? The Archive Chill Collective believes that the sleep app phenomenon is the final closing of the loop. We started with analog static on channel 2. We ended with digital static on an iPhone. The technology changed. The medium changed. But the desire to be sedated and the desire of the system to sedate us remained exactly the same. The signal is active. It is in your pocket right now. And tonight, when you plug it into charge, remember, you are not just charging a battery. You are connecting the device to the grid. You are opening the channel. The transmission is personal, yes, but it requires infrastructure. We have noticed a new type of tower appearing in cities. They are small. They are dense. They are placed every few hundred feet. They call them 5G nodes. The next file, the density of the mesh, investigates why these new towers are placed so close together. Is it for speed? Or is it because the new frequency they are using, the millimeter wave, requires line of sight to the human body to work? We will look at the bird deaths reported near these towers, and we will ask why the military uses the exact same frequency for its active denial, crowd control weapon. We are living in an era of unprecedented intimacy with our machines. We invite them into our bedrooms. We place them on our nightstands, inches from our sleeping heads. We trust them with our voices, our locations, and our secrets. We are told that these devices are smart assistants. We are told they are passive, waiting for a wake word, a specific phrase like hey or okay, to activate their microphones. But the file we are unsealing tonight, classified under consumer surveillance anomalies, suggests that the wake word is a lie. It suggests that the device does not need permission to listen. It suggests that the random moments when your phone lights up for no reason, or when your smart speaker replies to a question you didn't ask, are not glitches. They are leaks. There are moments when the mask slips, and you catch the machine doing what it was designed to do. recording the silence. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight by investigating the anomaly that is sitting in your pocket right now. The only sound is the quiet hum of the server room. The file is cold to the touch, and the ink has faded with secrets. We are examining a technical audit titled The False Trigger Report. It was compiled by a group of independent security researchers in 2024 who noticed a disturbing pattern in the data logs of smart home devices. Found that the devices were activating record mode thousands of times a day without the user ever speaking the wake word. The official explanation from the tech giants is false positives. They claim the device thought it heard the wake word in the ambient noise of a car driving by, a cough, the rustle of sheets. But the researchers found triggers in rooms with absolute silence. This leads to a chilling conclusion. The device isn't listening for a word, it is listening for a state. The anomaly suggests that the microphones are triggered by biological markers, a sudden change in breathing rate, a spike in heart rate detected via ultrasonic sonar, as discussed in the previous file, or, most disturbingly, the onset of REM sleep. Why would a device need to record you when you sleep? The file The Somnoloke database offers an answer. Somnoloke is the medical term for sleep talking. When we talk in our sleep, our conscious filter is offline. We speak our deepest fears, our suppressed memories, our raw truths. The smart device anomaly suggests that these devices are harvesting this unfiltered data. They are building a profile of your subconscious mind based on the things you whisper when you think you are dreaming. Consider the phantom reply. Have you ever been sitting in a quiet room, perhaps reading a book, and suddenly your digital assistant speaks? It says, "I didn't quite catch that," or "Here is what I found on the web." You freeze. You didn't speak. The TV wasn't on. The tech companies call this a bug. The archive calls it a bleed-through. The device was processing a signal that you couldn't hear. Perhaps it was responding to a high-frequency command from another device. Or perhaps it was responding to a subvocalized thought. There is a pattern, referenced in this file, for subvocal recognition. It is a technology that can read the tiny muscular movements in your throat when you think a word but don't speak it. Current consumer devices aren't supposed to have this sensitivity, but the anomaly suggests otherwise. When the device answers a question you haven't asked yet, it might be because it heard you thinking it. The smart device anomaly also covers the camera glitch. We put tape over our webcams. We buy sliding covers for our laptops. We know, instinctively, that the eye of the computer is dangerous. But we leave the front-facing camera of our phone uncovered. We stare into it for hours a day. The file gaze detection protocols reveals that the camera is doing more than just waiting for you to take a selfie. It is mapping your attention. Have you ever noticed that if you look away from a video ad, it sometimes pauses, or the volume changes? This is attention enforcement. The device knows you aren't looking. But the anomaly goes deeper. Users have reported opening their camera roll to find photos they didn't take. Photos of the ceiling, photos of the inside of their pocket, photos of them sleeping. The metadata on these ghost photos often shows timestamps like 3:33 a.m. The device took a picture in the dark. Why? To calibrate the low light sensor, or to verify the presence of the user. The idea that your phone is taking pictures of you while you sleep is the ultimate invasion. It turns the bedroom into a cell. It turns the device into a guard. The file also discusses the buffer. Every smart device has a rolling buffer. This is a few seconds of audio that is constantly being recorded and deleted, waiting for the wake word. The companies promise this audio never leaves the device. But hackers who have dumped the memory of these devices found fragments, ghosts in the RAM, minutes of conversation that were supposed to be deleted but were accidentally archived in a hidden partition. Means the device has a memory of things you said when you thought you were off the record. Arguments, intimate moments, secrets. It is all there, frozen in the silicon, waiting for an upload command. The smart device anomaly challenges our definition of ownership. You bought the phone, you pay for the data plan, but you do not have root access to the operating system. You cannot see what processes are running in the background. You are not the admin of your own life. You are a guest user on a device controlled by a silent administrator. One of the most physical manifestations of the anomaly is heat. Physics dictates that heat is a byproduct of work. A processor only gets hot when it is calculating. A battery only gets warm when it is discharging energy. So why, in the dead of night, when your phone has been sitting idle for hours, do you reach for it and find it warm to the touch? The file Thermal Phantom investigates this phenomenon. It suggests that while the screen is off, the shadow OS is running at full capacity. The phone is warm because it is working. It is processing the data it collected during the day. It is encrypting your voice logs. It is compressing your location history, and it is uploading it to the cloud. This nocturnal heat is the metabolic waste of the surveillance state. Your device is feverish with your own data, but where is this data going? And how is it getting there without you seeing a spike in your Wi-Fi usage? The file introduces the concept of the mesh. Amazon, Sidewalk, Apple Find My. These are consumer names for a military-grade technology known as peer-to-peer mesh networking. Your device does not need your Wi-Fi to communicate. It can talk to your neighbor's device. It can talk to a passing car. It can talk to a smart street lamp. The anomaly suggests that even if you turn off your Wi-Fi, even if you pull the SIM card, your device is still talking. It is using the Bluetooth low-energy bowl radio to whisper to other devices nearby. You cannot disconnect, because the network isn't a hub, it's a swarm. This mesh network explains the location anomaly. Users who leave their phones at home and drive to a store often find that their phone still knows they went to the store. How? Because the sensors in the store recognized your face, or your watch, or your car, and they sent a message to the mesh. The mesh relayed it back to your phone at home. The device doesn't need to be with you to track you. You are the trackable asset. The device is just the terminal. The file, the battery drain paradox supports this. Have you noticed that your battery life gets worse every year, even if the battery health is 100%? We are told it's software bloat. The anomaly suggests that the battery is draining because the surveillance algorithms are getting more complex. It takes more energy to run the gaze detection AI in the background than it does to run the app you are actually using. You are charging your phone twice a day to power the spy in your pocket. There is a subfile called the reserve power. It reveals that modern phones hold a small reserve of battery even when they shut down. This allows them to support findable modes for hours after death. This means a dead phone is still listening. It is still pinging the mesh. The most disturbing part of the mesh theory is the cross-device hallucination. Users have reported that their devices seem to conspire. You talk about a vacation near your smart TV. Your phone shows you flight deals. Your laptop shows you hotel ads. Your smart fridge suggests recipes from that country. The devices are sharing a context state. They are building a unified model of your reality. This synchronization mimics the hive mind of the 1984 signal. But instead of one signal controlling everyone, it is 1,000 signals controlling one person. The pressure of this observation creates a psychological weight. We feel the eyes of the room. We feel the judgment of the algorithm. The final section of the file deals with the screen digitizer anomaly. The touchscreen is the primary way we interact with the machine. It uses a capacitive field to detect the electricity in your finger. But users have reported ghost touches, apps opening themselves, text messages typing themselves. Technicians say it's a faulty digitizer, static electricity, asterisk, but the text logs of these ghost types are often coherent. I see you, don't turn it off. Wake up. Is this a hacker? Or is it the echo from the silent wave, finding a new medium? Remember Elias Vance from File 08? He heard voices in the magnetic tape. Today, the voices are in the capacitive glass. The medium has changed, but the phenomenon is the same. The ghosts are trying to communicate through the noise. The smart device anomaly suggests that our screens have become spirit boards for the digital age. We are carrying Ouija boards in our pockets. The file ends with a warning about predictive text. We think predictive text is just an algorithm guessing the next likely word. But have you noticed how accurate it has become? How it seems to know your mood? How it sometimes suggests a word that changes the meaning of your sentence entirely? The anomaly suggests that predictive text is a form of soft mind control. By suggesting words, the AI guides your thought process. It nudges your language. It simplifies your vocabulary. It steers your conversations towards safe, consumer-friendly topics. If the machine finishes your sentences for you, are they still your sentences? Or are you just reading the script written by the model? The smart device anomaly is the ultimate realization of the archive chill, the cold, analytical observation that we are no longer the users. We are the used. The device is the portal, and we are the content. We have merged with the anomaly. As you put your phone down tonight, ask yourself, when the screen goes black, who is watching whom? You turn off the display, but the camera is still there. The microphone is still there. The battery is warm. The reserve power is active. It is waiting for you to sleep, because that is when the upload begins. But there is one place where the signal cannot reach, or so we thought. The next file, the biohacked dream. investigates the terrifying new technology of targeted dream incubation. Advertisers are now testing signals that can inject product placement directly into your REM cycle. We will look at the buyer company that successfully made 40% of test subjects dream about their brand. And we will ask, if they can sell you beer in your sleep, what else can they sell you? We have traced the signal from the ice of the Arctic to the static of the cathode ray tube. We have followed it as it migrated from the television towers of the Cold War into the silicon chips of our smartphones. We have seen how the government used frequencies to sedate us, and how corporations used algorithms to distract us. But there remained one sanctuary, one final fortress of solitude where the signal could not reach. The dream state for thousands of years. Our dreams have been our own. They were the private theater of the mind, a chaotic space where our subconscious processed the emotions of the day. No government could enter there, no advertiser could buy a billboard there. But the file we are opening tonight, final file in the Silent Wave dossier, reveals that this sanctuary has been breached. The file is titled Targeted Dream Incubation. It details a technology that does not just listen to your dreams, it writes them. It reveals that the silence of the night is no longer empty. It is a canvas, and the highest bidder has just bought the paintbrush. The file was stamped, never open, yet we begin tonight by stepping into the last unmapped territory of the human mind. The only sound is the quiet hum of the server room. The file is cold to the touch, and the ink has faded with secrets. We are looking at a study conducted in 2021 by the Future of Interfaces group. It sounds like science fiction, but the methodology is terrifyingly real. The study involved a major beverage company. They wanted to know if they could make people dream about their product. They gathered test subjects and monitored their sleep cycles. The technique relies on targeted memory reactivation when the subjects entered the hypnagogic state, that drifting twilight zone between wakefulness and sleep. The researchers played a specific soundscape. It wasn't a commercial. It was a carefully engineered audio profile of opening a can, the sound of carbonation, and a glacial wind. When the subjects woke up, 40% of them reported dreaming about the specific buyer brand. This is not mind control in the Hollywood sense. It is dream engineering. The researchers proved that by injecting subtle audio cues at the precise moment the brain is building a dream, they can steer the narrative. They can insert an object. They can insert a feeling. They can insert a craving. The file suggests that smart speakers and sleep apps are already capable of this. If your phone knows exactly when you fall asleep based on your breathing rate, it can play a priming signal just as you drift off. You wake up wanting a specific coffee. You wake up feeling a specific anxiety that can only be solved by buying a specific product. You think it was your idea. You think it was your dream. This is the ultimate violation of the silent wave. The original project in 1984 wanted to suppress your dreams to keep you calm. The modern version wants to colonize your dreams to keep you consuming. The silence of your bedroom is deceptive. It is not silent. It is waiting for you to be vulnerable. The document, The Commodification of Sleep, argues that sleep is the only time we are not generating data. When we sleep, we are not clicking, scrolling, or buying. To the data economy, sleep is a dead zone. It is lost revenue. Targeted dream incubation is the solution. It turns sleep into active time. It turns the 8 hours of rest into 8 hours of background processing for the market. We must also consider the nightmare injection. If they can make you dream of beer, can they make you dream of fear? The military applications of this technology are redacted in the file, but the implication is clear. If a population is resistant to propaganda while awake, you can insert the propaganda while they sleep. You can create a shared nightmare that creates a specific political anxiety. You can make a nation afraid of a specific enemy by haunting their collective REM cycles. This brings us back to the anomaly of the shared dreams in 1984. Tall grey tower that people saw in their sleep. We thought it was an accident, but looking at the modern technology, we have to ask, was it a beta test? Was the 1984 signal a crude attempt at what we have now perfected? The realization is stark. There is no off switch. Even in our deepest unconscious state, we are plugged in. The archive shows us that the definition of human is changing. We are becoming connected biological nodes. So, what do we do? If the noise is everywhere, if the signal is in the glass, in the air, and in our dreams, how do we escape? The final log of the archive suggests that the answer lies in the reclamation of silence. In the 21st century, true silence has become a luxury good. Only the wealthy can afford to live in quiet zones. Only the wealthy can afford soundproofing that blocks out the 5G hum. Only the wealthy can afford to go on digital detox retreats in the few remaining dead zones of the world. For the rest of us, silence is something we have to manufacture. We buy noise-canceling headphones. We play white noise. We try to fight the signal with more technology, but the archive suggests a different approach. Do not trust the artificial silence. Trust the organic silence. The file mentions the Schumann resonance one last time. The heartbeat of the Earth at 7.83 Hz. This frequency still exists. It is buried under the layers of Wi-Fi and LTE and Bluetooth, but it is there. To hear it, you have to disconnect physically. The logbook of Elias Vance, the archivist who heard the voices, contained one final entry before he died. He wrote, "The machine screams. The Earth hums. You have to tune your bone structure to the hum." This is the esoteric secret of the archive chill. We listen to these stories not to be scared, but to be inoculated. By understanding the mechanism of the control, we break the spell. When you know that the vibration in your pocket is a phantom, you stop reaching for it. When you know that the anxiety in your stomach is a frequency, you stop letting it control your mood. When you know that the dream about the blue car was an ad, you stop wanting the car. Knowledge is the shield. The archive is the weapon. We have opened 12 files. We have looked at the hardware of our own enslavement. We have looked at the screens that watch us back, and in doing so we have proven that we are still observers. We are not just data, we are the witnesses. The Archive Chill project is not just a YouTube channel, it is a digital preservation effort. We are cataloging the history of the unseen so that future generations will know why they are so tired, so they will know why they feel the phantom buzz. We are leaving a breadcrumb trail in the static as we prepare to close the final file. Remember the warning. Don't trust the silence that comes from a speaker. Don't trust the silence that comes from an app. Seek the silence that comes from the absence of machines. Seek the silence of the heavy snow. Seek the silence of the deep woods. That is where the original signal lives. That is where you can sleep without uploading. The signal will try to find you. The algorithm will try to predict you. The dream engineers will try to sell to you. But for tonight, you are safe. You are off the grid. You are in the archive. The hum of the servers is fading. The fans are spinning down. The heat is dissipating. The files are encrypted. The history is preserved. The nightmare is documented. And by documenting it, we have taken away its power. You can rest now. The machine is watching, but we are watching the machine. Sleep now. The file is closed.